Good afternoon, Senator Darrell Abbas from District 22, representing the communities of Pelham, Salem, Axon, and Plastow. And I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 128, and I will defer any testimony to upcoming witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. The judicial branch is in support of this statute. The amendment to the statute, what it does in essence is it transfers the reimbursement of legal counsel's payment for involuntary admission cases from the court system to judicial counsel. There have been some amendments that I believe have been submitted to folks. There is a reference to the legal assistance in the original statute, and legal assistance has not been part of the process as it's developed over the years. So the judicial branch certainly does not have any opposition to, if we're going to clean it up, to clean that portion up as well. But judicial counsel is the better entity to be reimbursing counsel after they're appointed to participate in these cases. I'm happy to answer any questions and appreciative of Senator Abbas.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have any questions of any of the senators? Seeing none, you're all set. Thank you very much for your testimony. Would anyone else like to testify on 128? Seeing none? Thank you.
Take your paper and then you have your paper here.
already. I was going to say Commerce. Senate Judiciary is back in session. We are next going to hear Senate Bill 129. The Honorable Senator Darrell Abbas from the wonderful town of Salem is here to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator Darrell Abbas, I represent District 22. It's the communities of Pelham, Salem, Atchison, and Plastow. And I'm introducing Senate Bill 129, and I will yield my testimony. Any questions for later?
Thank you, Senator. Mary Ann Dempsey, back again.
Good afternoon, committee members. Mary Ann Dempsey, General Counsel for the Judicial Branch. The Judicial Branch is requesting the statutory change which would remove the requirement that parties who cannot afford a mediation and have already been determined to be indigent, that they repay the costs. So the fees are paid from the mediation and arbitration fund, which is through filing fees, but essentially the folks have already been determined unable to pay the cost of mediation, so we would be looking to eliminate that part of the statute. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't think I see any, and I thank you for your testimony. Sarah, that's Dustin. Speaking, says yes. I'll try again. Sarah Matson, Dustin. Okay. Seeing no one else, anyone else for 129? Going, gone. Thank you. $180. This can't be, oh no, it's a bar, right? Maybe I'm wrong. I thought abortion kids was going to be a big thing. Oh, okay. Oh, that's the reason. Okay, I was going to say. I don't know. Originally this was mine, but then I figured Sharon stole it, but that's okay.
Good to see you as well, and good to be seen. And if I feel like I'm rushed, I am, because I got another bill at the exact same time that they haven't gotten to in finance. So I'm going to introduce the bill and ask if I could be excused. I know there's some people that are going to testify on it as well, and I would appreciate your support for the bill. But being the co-sponsor, and for the record, I'm Senator Kevin Navard, District 12, introducing SB 180FN. This bill basically revises the warning labels that are placed on marijuana products sold at alternative treatment centers. And it requires that the product information guide be distributed by the alternative treatment centers with their marijuana products. I do have some talking points. The purpose of the bill is basically to take a small step towards patient advocacy. It's not a pro, it's not against marijuana. I know those are important topics for some people, but this is pretty much just for the patients that are going to be using it. So it does this by making the Department of Health and Human Service update their labeling. We currently have a federal code which requires that each participant dispense must have a standardized medical information guide. It also indicates the size of the fonts, and so the information guide, the language in this bill is very close to what is currently required by federal law. If medical marijuana wants to be legitimized, why should the patients not have the same consumer protection? And that's the whole spirit of the bill. And I did bring this bill out for a constituent, so they'll be talking a little bit more in detail as to what's inside it. And I'm sorry for feeling so rushed, but my other bill is being heard as well. Right. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So the current laws have been in place for several years. Have we heard sort of that there are problems with it? Are we responding to something with this?
It's my understanding that we just want to get them updated to the federal standard. That's my understanding to, the purpose of the bill. Thank you very much, and appreciate it.
Knurk, yes. Thanks, sir. Actually, by the way, I really couldn't, although those back here could not hear the testimony of Senator Abar because he wasn't using the mic. So my testimony has been distributed. It's in you have the packet, but don't be put off by the length of the packet. 80% of that is just supporting information for you to be able to look at regarding what we're doing. So for the record, I'm Jerry Knurk, served for 6 years in the House. I serve as the chair of the Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board, and I'm a retired surgeon. So the Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board is statutorily charged with the medical oversight of the New Hampshire Therapeutic Cannabis Program. The board's composed of 10 medical providers from different specialties. The medical director of DHHS, a therapeutic cannabis patient, and a clinical representative from an ATC. Cannabis has been demonstrated to be of therapeutic value for a number of medical conditions, such as pain, PTSD, and others. But it is true that therapeutic cannabis does have side effects and risks, as do all medications. Keep in mind that, for example, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like Motrin are responsible for over 100,000 hospitalizations and over 16,000 deaths per year in the United States. Prednisone, one of our most important medications to treat inflammatory conditions, has an incredible number of terrible side effects, but they can be life-saving and life-altering. And we all know the side effects and the risks of opioids. But most of us are pretty grateful to have them for the first few days after we have a major surgical procedure. In medicine, we always have to balance the risks and the benefits of any procedure or any medicine, and assessing that balance for therapeutic cannabis is precisely the job of the Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board. Now, since most therapeutic cannabis bills go over to HHS, I want to clarify for this committee a couple of points. First, to enroll in the therapeutic cannabis program, you have to be certified by a medical provider that you have a qualifying medical condition as established in law. ATCs, or alternative treatment center dispensaries, then counsel patients regarding the appropriate strains to use and routes of administration, and they distribute or dispense the cannabis. The therapeutic cannabis program provides valuable educational and therapeutic benefits to over 13,000 patients in New Hampshire. And the majority of patients qualified to use therapeutic cannabis are between ages 50 and 70. Currently, over 70% of people are certified for treating pain, either chronic pain or severe pain. And this often allows them to either lessen or completely avoid the use of opioids. An important thing to understand is that patients in therapeutic cannabis are using cannabis to treat a disorder, not to become intoxicated. Intoxication is not the intended effect. In fact, it is a side effect, which we do not want. The goal is to relieve the symptoms so they can be functional. Intoxication would preclude being functional. So the strategy used with patients is to start low and go slow. That means starting at a low dose and slowly titrating the dose upward to achieve the desired therapeutic effect without the side effect of intoxication or euphoria. We strive for the appropriate dose to achieve the desired therapeutic control of symptoms without intoxication. Now, TCMOB was not able to evaluate the specific language of SB 180. I tried unsuccessfully to get that language in time for our January meeting, but I was unable to do so. But I can speak for where we have stood historically, because we've worked on this stuff a lot. Remember, this is basically medical labeling. TCMOB has historically agreed with warnings and precautions regarding the use of therapeutic cannabis, as is done with traditional prescription drugs. If we look back historically, HB 1591 from 2020 directed the commissioner to develop guides for patients regarding cannabis use during pregnancy, lactation, and adolescence. We actually evaluated that bill, and we suggested that should be in the purview of TCMOB. It was amended to do that. That bill died a COVID death, but it was then passed the following year as HB 163. TCMOB then dutifully developed the brochures and the posters regarding pregnancy and lactation, and is starting the work on documents for warnings regarding use of cannabis in adolescents. If you look at the packet, the landscape orientation material that you have right in front of you, that's a trifold that we've developed for therapeutic cannabis patients regarding pregnancy and lactation, and this is a poster which will be in all of the ATCs. So all that is available for you to look at and see what we've already been doing. Redundancy of warning is built into the therapeutic cannabis program. The new certification forms going through rules in GELCAR in March require counseling by the certifying provider regarding the health effects of cannabis, the risks in children, the risks in childbearing and lactation, and the risks of use in adolescents, which has to be documented with the provider's sworn signature. That is more stringent than what's required for a provider to prescribe an opioid. I just wrote a prescription. I didn't have to have that for a procedure. I got signed consent, but not just to put them on a medication. And the ATC then provides the same counseling to the patient in writing. Now, if you look at the bill itself, page 1, line 19, inappropriately requests blanket activity restrictions for therapeutic cannabis patients. Blanket activity restrictions should not be placed given the individualized low dosing and choice of strains. Restrictions should be based on the degree of impairment. So, for example, analogy to regular medicine. We do not restrict a person on a chronic, stable dose of opioid from driving if they're not impaired. You always have the warning that says, don't you look to see what the effect is when you first start an opioid. When you're an opioid virgin, you don't take it and then go out and drive. That people who are on opioids for chronic pain are allowed to drive. As noted earlier, in therapeutic cannabis, we also start with a low dose, and intoxication is to be avoided. The strain may even have a very low THC, which is the intoxicating component of cannabis. And it's important to realize that in the application for the program, which the patient consents to with sworn signature, there's the warning that says, quote, I understand I may not be under the influence of therapeutic cannabis, and I won't read it to you, it's in the testimony, while operating a vehicle and so on, or in the place of employment, or when operating heavy machinery. Very similar to what's requested in this bill, it's already there. This warning is further reinforced in the ATC patient handbooks and acknowledged with sworn signature on the ATC intake forms, signature of the patient. Detailed information regarding safe storage away from children, side effects of cannabis use, information regarding adverse reactions and cannabis use disorder are also covered in depth in the ATC patient handbooks. Now, if you look at the packet I gave you after the poster, you'll find some sample pages from the Temescal handbook. The first one has information about saying, don't drive if you're impaired, store it safely, don't use during pregnancy or lactation. And then pages about cannabis safety, patients in that, it talks about cannabis use disorder or drug abuse. And then pages for child safety tips that talks about safe storage and preventing youth use. So all of these things are already there. They're quite thorough. So my testimony, I think, has demonstrated that SB 180 really is not needed because the education and the warnings it requests are already in place or are currently being worked on. And it's also important to note that the CDC statement referenced in the bill refers to recreational cannabis use. That's very different from therapeutic cannabis, just as opioid abuse is different than properly used prescription opioids. If you do wish to proceed with SB 180, I would recommend that the task of developing the information guide and the annual review should be the responsibility of the Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board, not the commissioner, because this is the work we do. And this could easily be done by just adding to our charge in 126X12 the responsibility for the development of a patient guide. We basically already have that, but it's not one little guide. It's, as you see from what I've handed out, much more. I also have to point out that 90 days is not a sufficient time to do a good job of developing readable and accurate information guides. It took us several months to work on our pregnancy and lactation information, including with people that are professional writers for working with the general public, because you can't keep it in doctor jargon. Also, the requirement for the guide to be attached to each package is just not reasonable. Many of the packages are rather small. A person may go to the ATC and pick up 4 or 5 packages on one visit. They don't need 4 or 5 redundant packages. That'd be a waste of money and paper. So that exceeds what's done in a pharmacy. You don't get, when you go get it, you have your pills, and there might be a couple little phrases, and you might get a folded up piece of paper that goes in the bag, but you don't have all this stuff attached to every single thing you get. So again, there are parts of this bill that go above and beyond what is normally done for pharmaceuticals. So a single copy could be provided at the first visit, which basically it is with the handbook and the intake forms. And if desired, you could distribute it each year. And lastly, if you look at page 1 in line 7 to 10, that codifies medical warnings and information in statute. That should never be done. We don't legislate the practice of medicine because it changes over time. So that shouldn't go in statute. Again, that should be something that TCMOB would update on a regular basis, which is what we already do. So with that in mind, again, I would recommend that this bill would be ITL'd. If it is not, I would at least recommend that it would be coming under the purview of TCMOB because that is our job, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nerk. Do you have any questions? Yes, go ahead, Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for taking my questions. It's good to see you.
Thanks,
All right, question. How come the commission now hasn't done anything to address the warning labels?
Has it addressed the what?
What has the commission done to address the labels on ATC products sold today?
Well, we have, first of all, we actually did this last year look at all the labeling that is on, we reviewed the labeling of all the products, what's on them currently. But we also have reviewed what is given to the patients. Again, as I say, if you go to pick up a prescription for, let's say, naproxen, it might have a thing about, being careful about, not taking an empty stomach or something like that, but it's not going to go over all kinds of other issues, and it's not attached to the bottle. It'd be folded up and put in the bag that you're given. In therapeutic cannabis, that's also given out. When the patient comes in, they actually have to sign a form that they understand various risks involved. Or sometimes it's not a signed form, but as you look at the information I gave you, a whole laundry list of the side effects are listed, and that's from the Temescal handbook. So these things are already provided to the patient. Again, we could make it one form, but one also has to be cautious on that because the response may be extremely different if somebody is doing a mostly CBD, very low THC. The risks for that are going to be very different than a primary THC product. Likewise, let's say they take just a simple, small gummy at night before they go to bed to be able to, sleep a little bit better. They don't need a warning about what's going to happen during the day because that's going to already be gone. So it's individualized.
Thank you. No further questions.
Sue Pamola.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify on this bill. I want to say thank you to Senator Avard for sponsoring it. This was a bill that I actually had intended to do, and I was working on with OLS throughout the summer, but I didn't get reelected, so Senator Avard picked it up for me. I'm very grateful for him. The purpose of this bill is, I just want to say right off the bat, it has nothing to do with whether or not the medical therapeutic cannabis program is valid or not. It has nothing to do with that. This is strictly patient advocacy. The purpose of this bill is to direct New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services to update the labeling requirements for medical marijuana products and to strengthen consumer protections and capabilities by providing consumers with information regarding marijuana use. Currently, medical marijuana labeling requirements are outlined in the Department of Health and Human Services Registry Rules 402. And in part, on the labels, it says, there is limited information on the side effects of using this product, and there may be associated health risks. Based off widely available data and guidance, this label information is no longer fully accurate and adequate. We now can definitively state that there is information on the side effects using this product, and there are associated health risks. This bill simply wants to change 2 words or alter 2 words on that label. Although the wording changes are minor, they more accurately reflect the caution in which medical marijuana consumers should approach this product. The second objective to this bill is to provide consumers with an information guide that outlines the known risks. And we just heard testimony on how some of this information is already provided. I will add to that this goes a little bit further than just brochures that consumers can pick up and posters that might be on the wall. This information guide was modeled after the medication guide requirements outlined in U.S. Code of Federal Regulation Title 21. And we're all familiar with them. This is the one that my daughter got on Sunday when she had a sinus infection for Augmentin. And when we were there at the doctor gave us information on some of the side effects of the product, and yet we still receive this in the pharmacy because it's a U.S. code that all medications come with this. We heard some testimony a moment ago saying that when you go to the doctor, you go to the pharmacy, you get multiple things. You get one of these for absolutely every medication you have. And the goal of this bill isn't to put in 40 duplicate sheets of paper if somebody's getting a variety of products. There should be just one medication guide or information guide given out at a time. The medical marijuana, although medical marijuana is not a prescribed medication, it is being promoted and used as a treatment and or an aid for over 30 qualifying medical conditions. This medical use is now codified in our legislation, and in the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services has directed the oversight of the and DHS has direct oversight of the therapeutic cannabis program. This agency is also supported, as stated before, by the Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board, whose purpose, I'd like to add, is to, quote, monitor and contribute to the oversight of the clinical, quality, and public health-related matters of the use of cannabis for therapeutic purposes. In many respects, the state is somewhat sanctioning the usage of a product, but not being as proactive as it can regarding the consumer information protections that are out there. This is not something that even over-the-counter medications can do. We even see if we get Tylenol, there's stuff right there on the warning on the box labels. And why should we be more proactive about providing medical marijuana consumers with more information on the side effects and risks of marijuana? Since medical marijuana has become more prolific across the U.S., so has the data on the side effects and the risks associated with its use. The risks are clearly documented by the CDC and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and which constitutes our nation's leading source of medical guidance. This documentation clearly includes information on addiction, depression, psychosis, cancer, impaired heart health, mental health, addiction twice, THC poisoning, risk of use of other drugs, brain health, risk to teens' health, driving impairment, lung health issues, risk during pregnancy, secondhand smoke, etc. In addition to this, there are voluminous amounts of scientific data regarding the risks associated with using any marijuana product containing high concentrates of THC. Some risks associated with high THC consumption include psychosis, suicidal ideation, increases in addiction, and cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. And this is just to name a few. Currently, there are products being offered on our alternative treatment center websites that contain high levels of THC concentrates, some up to 90%. I have in testimony, you all have this as well. This is the best I can do to print off mine, but this is just a little sampling of a menu from Prime ATC's offerings. In it, I highlighted the percent of THC in the products that were available. While I'm offering no opinion on whether or not such high concentrations should be sold in our state-sanctioned ATCs, what I'm contending is that most of the products that the ATC sell contain THC levels in excess of 15%. It is noteworthy that in 2021, the Vermont Medical Society issued a resolution to call for reform to Vermont's marijuana programs and to highlight the risks associated with using products that were above 15% THC. I would contend that you're going to have a hard time finding a product that's 15% or less THC on our medical marijuana programs. This warrants us to be a little bit more proactive about informing consumers on some of the risks of use. Now, it's clear that our current labeling requirements for medical marijuana are outdated, and people who seek medical marijuana products are doing so to ameliorate certain health conditions. They deserve equitable product knowledge and consumer oversight that is routinely afforded to individuals who use over-the-counter and prescribed medication. Given that the Department of Health and Human Services is directly responsible for the oversight of the medical marijuana program, providing consumers with knowledge regarding side effects of usage is not only a responsible path forward, it's a public health imperative. Instead of asking ourselves, why is this bill needed? I'd like to actually offer another question. Why haven't we done this already? When I was doing this bill, I was told by OLS, when I said, well, how can we, if we want to make changes to the label to make them more accurate, how do we do it? And there's three ways. Said you can go and you could ask DHS to do that. Based off some interactions I've had before, I felt like that wasn't going to get us anywhere. Said you could sue DHS. I'm not going to do that. Or you can write it into statute that they need to update their labels. So that was the third option that I chose. Lastly, I'd like to end this way and say we really need to ask ourselves if there's other ways in which we need to strengthen our consumer protections and advocacy for those who participate in New Hampshire's therapeutic cannabis program. For instance, here's two quick things. The ATC website has a bare minimum age validation entry system that needs immediate improvement. You click on a button. Are you 21? Yeah. Okay, that's it. That's all they care about. That's all they not care about, pardon me. That's all that you have to do to enter in and see whatever product they have on there. Even Anheuser-Busch has a better system to go and look on their website. And then also the list of qualifying medical conditions also needs updating because some of the data regarding medical marijuana use for certain conditions has been significantly updated over the past couple years. We see a trend where oversight boards tend to put medical conditions on this list, but they don't take them off. Currently, there are some qualifying medical conditions on our program that may be made worse with marijuana use, and I've included some examples here to include glaucoma, PTSD, and moderate to severe vomiting. I encourage you all to move forward on this bill as a positive first step towards strengthening our consumer protections in the therapeutic cannabis program. Any questions?
Good afternoon. Is it Representative Hamola or? Former representative, okay. One of the things that you talked a little bit about, which I find very concerning, is the level of THC that is present in some of these products. I'm thinking back to when we had those original discussions, and we were told that people are not using medicinal marijuana for the THC level. It is the other properties of marijuana that people who, especially people who have cancer and are going through chemotherapy and things like that. Should we, what do you think we should be doing about that? Did you have any thoughts about that? Because 15% is, it just, I agree with you, it just doesn't seem realistic. Is there a realistic number that would be appropriate for consumers?
Well, I would like to say to that the citing of a 15% number was just to highlight that in many of the studies in which they tested medical marijuana for medicinal purposes, it was at a 15% THC. Now, I'm offering no opinion one way or another on whether that's appropriate. I'm just highlighting the fact that Vermont, the Medical Association of Vermont, is actually put out a resolution this year and I've included all these links that I have for you all. I'll send you the information electronically. I have a lot of links in there, but you can read the resolution that talks about the concern over the high THC levels. Now, I make no judgment either way of the THC levels. I have a friend whose son passed away from cancer, a young man, and this was something that ameliorated some of his suffering at the end. So I'm very empathetic to that. But what we really should be doing is telling people and doing a little bit more research and providing a little more proactive information on those THC levels and what could happen negatively when you consume too much. There's a lot of information. We had a discussion on recreational marijuana last week in the House, and one of the data, a bunch of data that I had provided was just talking about high levels and what that's doing in communities, particularly in Vermont. And their health services are raising the alarms about that. So merely all this bill is saying is that we need to be a little bit more proactive in how we provide people information so that they are not just walking past a poster or deciding to pick up a brochure or not. That's all I'm advocating for. I'm just advocating for a little bit more proactivity on our part, because in many ways we are sanctioning a product for medical use, but we are not providing some of the same protections that everyday drug manufacturers have to provide.
Follow up? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you think that New Hampshire as a state should be routinely testing the marijuana that's being sold at our ATCs for the THC level?
I am not as familiar with the testing that they do on that website for the ATCs. You can actually, on their menu, you can actually see where it lists THC levels. So there must be some version of testing going on there for them to have been able to evaluate that product. I will say it almost seems like on those websites that the THC levels, I'm not sure if they're posted because that encourages people to go for the product that they want with the THC level. It's hard to tell because when you go to those websites on the ATCs, on both of them, and you look at it, you would imagine if this is a medical marijuana provider program that, you may see, what are you trying to do? And instead of seeing like nausea or whatever, you say, feel happy, mellow out, chill, get excited. I mean, there's nothing medical about it. So I beats me what testing or what the value of listing on their perspective, what the value of listing the THC levels are. I just know that they're high. I just know that I tried to find things that were 10% to 15%, very difficult to.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
That's
For the record, good afternoon. For the record, Matt Simon, I represent Prime ATC. We're one of the nonprofit alternative treatment centers that is licensed to provide therapeutic cannabis to registered patients. We have dispensaries in Merrimack and Chichester. We have a cultivation facility in Peterborough. And we believe this bill, as former Representative Knirk said, is unnecessary. We certainly believe that cannabis products should be thoroughly labeled and regulated and labeled appropriately, but we believe that's already the case in the New Hampshire Therapeutic Cannabis Program. And this is something that has come up regularly at the meetings of the Medical Oversight Board. We've talked quite a lot about what type of patient education should be administered, both when they first arrive and product labeling and everything in between. So we would welcome any changes to our labeling if they're thoroughly discussed by the Medical Oversight Board and if our regulators think they're wise. I want to take an opportunity, since we're apparently very concerned about the labeling of THC products. I think we need to consider the way all THC products are being labeled that are sold in New Hampshire. So you may not be aware of this, but you can walk into gas stations and vape shops in New Hampshire and you can buy THC products. These are hemp-derived THC products. Some of them are a little bit different than the Delta-9 THC on the molecular level. Delta-9 THC is the THC that those of us who consume botanical cannabis are familiar with. That's the stuff that's in marijuana, the stuff that gets you quote-unquote high. With the passage of the Farm Bill federally in 2018, this legalized the cultivation of hemp and production of hemp products federally. And what people did not realize at the time in Congress, or I think in the New Hampshire legislature, is that if you can grow fields of CBD, you can chemically convert that CBD into THC. You can convert it into a variant called Delta-8 THC. There's Delta-10 THC. And you can convert it into Delta-9 THC, which is exactly the same molecule that is present in therapeutic cannabis or in marijuana. So I included some product labels. The first photo is, this is a product that was on display at a gas station. And it includes THCO, which is something called THC acetate. This is not a natural cannabinoid. This is one that's synthesized using chemicals from hemp-derived CBD. So I've included a couple articles about that. NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, is warning consumers about the harms of THC acetate, THCO. I've included another article from a magazine called Leafly. Leafly is actually the outlet that first reported accurately on what was causing the vape crisis caused by vitamin E acetate. If you remember, a few years ago, people started becoming mysteriously ill from unregulated vape products, and that turned out to be vitamin E acetate. So it was Leafly that first explained that, and here they are writing about what THCO is, how it's converted from CBD, and commenting on its dubious legal status. So it is federally legal to grow hemp and to make products from hemp, but there's another law called the Federal Analogs Act that makes synthetic drugs illegal across the board. So is this a synthetic drug? Is it a natural drug? I think if you read about it, you'll determine it's a synthetic drug. But I look at the warning label and I see the word safe. I see the word effective. I see that it gives the user an incredibly clean, euphoric, functional, and uplifting experience. I see it's all natural. I see no synthetics, no additives. Oh, but I do see one warning. It says, warning, may cause drowsiness. So this is a product that's more potent than anything we sell at the ATCs, and it's at a gas station. So I think that really needs to be part of any discussion that we have. On the last page that I included is a couple of screenshots from, I don't know, I didn't go to Plastow to see if the store exists. I did note that it was in your district, Senator Gannon, but it's online, and they claim to have a wide range of hemp-derived cannabinoids, including this product, Delta-9 taffy. Again, that's the same molecule that is in the edibles we sell at Prime ATC, except this company is advertising them on the internet and not warning anybody. Let's just say that there do not appear to be many warnings. And this is a package that contains, if you squint, you can see 300 milligrams of Delta-9 THC in this little container of taffy. looks tasty. So these products may be legal to produce. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily legal to sell or in New Hampshire, or that they should be. That's certainly commerce in New Hampshire is within the purview of the New Hampshire General Court. So a couple of brief comments with regard to the brochures that people may or may not take at the ATCs. That is actually required intake paperwork. The first time patients visit us, they have to receive the intake paperwork. They have to sign indicating that they've received it. With regard to independent lab testing, I'm pleased to inform you that independent lab testing is required for all products sold by ATCs in New Hampshire. This is a critical feature of effective cannabis regulation. Any decent regulatory regime has independent lab testing for cannabis products. It's important that patients be able to know the purity and the potency of what they're getting, and that is all labeled, not only the THC, but every cannabinoid that tests to be present. And we also label the terpenes, which are aromatic compounds that have some impact on patients' experience with THC. So all the cannabinoids and all the terpenes are accurately labeled on all the products we sell. Just by contrast, this THC acetate pen has a little QR code, which takes you to test results theoretically, but the person who took this photo went to the page from the QR code and it said page not found. So that was very encouraging. Not very encouraging. One last comment. We heard about the Vermont Medical Society making a recommendation for potency limits. I just want to clarify that was a recommendation for the adult use market. The Vermont Medical Society, to the best of my knowledge, has not made a similar recommendation for the medical program. I'm not aware of any state that limits potency in its medical program. I will conclude my testimony. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand you may not support Senate Bill 180, but if this were to become law, do you have any idea or any estimation what the cost would be to implement that label onto a product?
I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I understood your testimony correctly, there's essentially synthetic cannabis that's legal to purchase, but synthetic THC, but natural THC is still illegal. Is that your testimony?
Thank you for the question. I think there's some debate about what's synthetic and what isn't. And in fact, if you ask 5 different federal agencies whether these products are federally legal, you're liable to get 5 different answers. It doesn't provide a lot of clarity for anybody at any stage in that process. But I think if you read the Leafly article and see how THC acetate in particular is made by adding chemicals and going through processes, that does not sound like a natural substance to me. That sounds like a synthetic substance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And last question. I'm not saying you know this from personal experience, but is the effects of THC-O and THC similar?
Thank you for the question. I do have significant experience with Delta 9 THC. I've tried Delta 8 THC. I've never tried THC acetate, so I can't comment on that. I would say that Delta 8 and Delta 10 have a reputation of being less intoxicating than Delta 9, and in fact, that's some of their appeal. A lot of people don't want to get too intoxicated, and they find Delta 8 to be a light version of it. But THC acetate, by all accounts, is 2 to 3 times more psychoactive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Long time no see. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Kate Fry. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy at New Futures. We work on health and wellness policies, and my focus is on alcohol and other drugs. So I'm here actually somewhat in the middle of this discussion. I definitely support the concept of this bill. I'm going to leave with you today a report from the Journal of Pediatrics that just came out that actually got a lot of media around the increase in pediatric edible cannabis exposures. So there were 7,043 exposures during 2017 to 2021. In 2017, there were 207 reported cases. In 2021, 3,054 cases, an increase of 1,300%. So I don't think we can deny that there is a concern around the exposures. And that this has been, something that has increased over time as cannabis has gotten kind of the concern of the harm has been reduced, and also there's been more access. But I do think there are some issues with this particular bill. As the first part of the bill, I agree that it's already clear that there's labeling requirements in the rule that are duplicative of this, especially lines 7 through 10. I also think we should be consistent with the language, and if we're talking about therapeutic cannabis, instead of saying marijuana, we should say therapeutic cannabis. I do think that it is important to have somewhere in the statute that there is something about providing information about the other list here. When I say we, the Governor's Commission on Drugs and Alcohol worked with the therapeutic cannabis a long time ago when it was created, and actually the Prevention Task Force came up with the original drafts that they use now. And prior to that, though, there was no information coming from the ATCs around these concerns. So we were happy to offer help with that. I think if they're being used, there's no harm in having it in statute and rule. We always have to think about future changes in administration. They weren't always consistently used, I will say that. So I'm happy to hear they are now. But I don't think the argument is that we're doing this already. We shouldn't have a law that says we are required to do it. I do agree that this particular rule bill is not the way to go. Let me just see if there's more. And I agree definitely on the concerns around the synthetic issues. That is something that a lot of states are grappling with. It's certainly something that we need to examine very closely and make sure there's oversight. And of course, the same concerns around warnings. So with that, I will leave you the study, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions? Nope. Thank you, Ms. Fry. Heather Marablon? Okay, Heather Marie Sloan. Okay. So it's a rough day on names. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Heather Marie Brown, and I am the patient representative on the Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board. I also am classified as the alternate chair or vice chair of the board. My responsibility is to represent the patients of the state of New Hampshire, those current and those that will be joining our program. First thing I would like to point out, we have a therapeutic cannabis program in the state of New Hampshire. We do not have a medical marijuana program. I think there does need to be a distinction made between the two. I also have sat here and listened to some of the commentary, and I would just like to say that as a patient myself, I have seen products at dispensaries with less than 15% THC in it. I know for a fact that all products are required to go through extensive testing. In fact, we've even had the discussion at the Medical Oversight Board as to whether or not some of the testing should be increased or decreased, because we have a huge list of items that we test therapeutic cannabis for. I also would like to point out that the reason and the benefit that a high THC content can have for a patient is that it allows them to use less of the product, which means that they are able to medicate less throughout the day instead of having to take something that is, we'll say a 15% product. If a patient needs somewhere around 50 to 75 milligrams, of a higher percentage of THC, then that could require the patient to have to use many times throughout the day and could impact in their daily activities. By allowing for the higher amounts, you're allowing the patient to actually use less, therefore better utilizing how they dose themselves and how they dispense the cannabis to themselves throughout the day. I believe, thank God I don't have fancy letters after my name, but I believe that in some aspects, this bill unintentionally tries to sabotage the medicinal program. Therapeutic cannabis currently is extremely expensive. That is a hardship for some patients as it is. By instituting more redundancy into the system than what we already have, you are placing unneeded expense onto the ATCs within the state. And in turn, those ATCs are going to have to raise the prices on their products, therefore making their products even more accessible to patients than what they are, and more inaccessible, to patients than what they currently are. I unfortunately have many stories that I could share with you from patients that because they cannot afford therapeutic cannabis, they are forced to resort to other means of obtaining their cannabis, whether that be traveling over state lines or, unfortunately, the black market that we still have within the state. We work very hard at the Medical Oversight Board to work with the Department of Health and Human Services and to work with medical professionals and dispensaries in regards to warnings that we put on products that we make available to patients and so forth. You just heard numbers a few moments ago about children exposure. I would like to point out that a lot of the information you've heard today is in response and in regards to recreational use, not to therapeutic use. These are all numbers obtained through recreational use, not therapeutic use. The two are very, very different. And the reason that you are not being given those numbers is because those numbers in no way, shape, or form are anywhere near what they are for recreational use, because recreational use is still in many states illegal and it's still unregulated. So therefore, there's not as much protection put into it for patients or for individuals in the recreational market. I think that this bill needs to be killed. It needs to be ITL. It needs to disappear. I believe that we have a good system in place, and if anything, we should be allowing the Medical Oversight Board to have more input and more recommendation into how we can improve certain aspects. I would like to point out that some of the containers that I have received from these ATCs, some of them are literally this big. Now, please tell me what I'm supposed to do with a product this big that has a tail on it this long to accommodate all of these warnings. And the majority of these warnings are coming, again, based on recreational use, not therapeutic use. Yes, we know there is an impact. Yes, we know there are side effects, but some of them are quite different than what are listed here and that are being required of this bill. I think that we should be working with the system that we have currently in place and making improvements, but not making things so redundant that it destroys the program or a patient's ability to access therapeutic cannabis safely. I would also like to point out that in the state of New Hampshire, therapeutic cannabis is not a prescription. You do not receive a prescription for it. You receive a recommendation to use it. So again, we have to be very careful on what kind of restrictions we put on the requirements for therapeutic cannabis, because the requirements we are putting on therapeutic cannabis in a lot of ways are greater than the restrictions we are putting on actual prescribed medications throughout the state. So I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Seeing none, thank you. Mike Holt. Welcome, Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Michael Holt. I am the section administrator within the Division of Public Health Services that oversees the state's therapeutic cannabis program within the Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Public Health Services. The department does not have a position on Senate Bill 180, but I would like to provide some information to the committee about the bill. Generally speaking, the department is very supportive of efforts to provide education to qualifying patients registered with the state's therapeutic cannabis program about the risks of cannabis use. However, as has been stated, this bill is redundant with current efforts. That this bill is being proposed suggests that this work is not being done, when in fact, all of the work, all of the topics, the informational topics contained in this bill are being addressed. So, or are in the process of being addressed. So education on the topics in the bill are not only required, but they are being provided in various, sometimes multiple ways, including through education and counseling given by certifying medical providers before they certify a patient for the program. They're being provided in signed acknowledgments on the program applications that patients have to sign and agree with under penalty of perjury. They are being provided in information sent by the department to patients with their approval letters and with their cannabis registry ID cards. And lastly, they are being provided by the state's licensed alternative treatment centers upon a patient's intake and made available upon each visit. There's nothing in this bill, there's no topic in this bill that is where education is not being provided to our patient base. So in addition, as we've heard, the Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board, established under 126X:12, has already taken on this responsibility of reviewing and developing the information that is being provided. At the end of 2021, the TCMOB reviewed all of the educational material used by the ATCs. They provided specific feedback and recommendations to each of the ATCs on their educational material being used. The department inspects all educational material that's required by rule as part of its annual inspection process. And during the past two inspection cycles, 2022 and the current inspection cycle, 2023, we are inspecting these education materials, including verification that the recommendations made by the TCMOB have been followed by the ATCs. In addition, the TCMOB developed educational material on risks associated with pregnancy and while breastfeeding, and also on adolescents. And these materials are in the process of being rolled out to the ATCs for mandatory distribution to by the ATCs. So again, the bill is redundant with current practice. It's suggestive that this work is not being done when it is in fact being done. If this bill is to move forward, then the department would request that the TCMOB be given primary responsibility for developing and reviewing this information, not the department. This could be accomplished with a simple change to the law, which would add to the TCMOB's charge The responsibility for developing and reviewing educational material about the risks of cannabis use to be provided by ATCs and certifying medical providers to qualifying patients. Just add it to their charge. Currently, their work is under the catch-all, any other clinical matter that they deem appropriate. Adding a specific charge would put it on their, require it, even though they're already doing it. So again, if it's to move forward, we'd request that the primary responsibility be given to the TCMOB. We would request that they be given a more than a 90-day time frame to review all the materials again. They only meet 4 times a year currently. The two other concerns I have, one is a practical issue of this bill requires that this information guide be attached to every package. This has been said before. People go in and buy multiple packages. This is a redundant effort to be providing the same information 7 to 10 times on a single visit. Again, the word attached should be looked at. And finally, again, this was already addressed as well, but I'm concerned about the codification in statute of a warning label, which would not allow us to change that warning label after the fact without a statutory change. Through rulemaking, that's much more nimble than a statutory change. And in addition, we have very strong relationships regulatorily with the ATCs. And if a change to that warning label is deemed appropriate by the department and or the TCMOB, I assure you that the ATCs would update their warning labels to meet that need. As we say, the warning label language in the bill is exactly what appears on the labels now, except for 2 words, where the current rule says may and the bill says is or our or are. And those would be very easy changes to make, within the next month. So to conclude, if the bill is to move forward, then I'm happy to participate with members of the committee or the sponsors to narrow down the scope of the bill. But again, the bill is suggestive that the work is not being done.
Thank you,
But the work
Mr.
is
Holt.
being done.
Senator
Thank you.
Epps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. I believe the testimony was that some of the issues that Senate Bill 188 would address is in the process of being worked on right now. What is in the process of being worked on as opposed?
So there's 2 pieces of legislation that passed in 2021 that would require the TCMOB to develop information relative to the risks of cannabis use in 2 populations, pregnant women and while breastfeeding, and adolescents. The department partnered with CHI in developing brochures and posters for the ATCs to distribute to the ATCs for distribution to the patients. Those are being delivered as we speak. Within the month, those materials will be at the ATCs for delivery. The other body of work that is in process is the poster and the brochure on the risks of cannabis use during adolescence. The TCMOB has done its work in identifying the risks posed to those populations. However, the brochures and the posters are still in development internally with HHS, with our Bureau of Drug and Alcohol Services. So those are the 2 bodies of work that are still in process. One being handed out within the month, the second in active development, and the third piece I would mention, as Representative Knirk already mentioned, we are in rulemaking right now, updating our written certification, which is the form that the certifying providers sign, to make a requirement for the certifying providers to provide that level of education to their clients who are of childbearing age and in adolescence. So we're going to the March jail car with that set of rules.
Go ahead.
Thank you. You said that I mentioned the poster, and I've seen drafts of that language before in other bills. What is taking so long to get the poster prepared?
What has taken so long? The TCMOB needed to develop the risks, that the information, the scientifically based education that needs to be on those posters, and we need to distribute them. I will offer that you may have heard this in many forums, but the department, as like many other agencies, has severe staffing resources and staffing shortages to get work done. And so I certainly wish that this work had been completed before now, but I'm here to tell you that it is very close to being completed and in the process.
Well,
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
thank you, Senator Ennis. Go ahead, Senator Carson. Oh, okay, I thought you had that look. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Holt.
Thank you.
And that'll conclude us, unless someone else wants to testify who didn't sign in. Seeing none?
Committee will be at recess for 10 minutes.
Oh, that's good. That's a good thing.
The committee will come out of recess, and we're gonna, go ahead and open the public hearing on Senate Bill 181, an act relative to access to abortion care. And I will call the prime sponsor. We got papers flying everywhere here. Senator Rebecca Perkins Coca. Before you get started, Senator, I just would like to announce that I have had a request from Dr. Janet Perkins Howland to go after you. So I hope the audience and the legislators are going to be okay with that, but I have no problem with honoring the request. So, Senator, it's a pleasure to see you in front of Senate Judiciary.
Hello, committee members. It's a pleasure to be back. I hope your long day is going all right. All right. So good afternoon, Chairwoman, members of the committee. I am, for the record, Senator Rebecca Perkins Coca from District 21, here to introduce SB 181, the Access to Abortion Care Act. In 2021, I was a first-term senator. I was one of 2 young moms in the chamber. As many of you remember, that same term, new abortion restrictions were passed into law through our budget. I was just around 24 weeks pregnant when we first debated the bill. I was experiencing firsthand how frightening it is to think you won't be allowed a full range of medical care that was available to you previously. No future parent should ever again have to worry that their rights will be taken away. Last year, I introduced the Access to Abortion Care Act to guarantee the right to abortion before 24 weeks in New Hampshire. Months later, the Supreme Court leaked the eventual Dobbs decision that overturned Roe, leaving folks across the country vulnerable. It didn't take long for millions across the country to lose their rights. Today, 20 million people have lost access to abortion in their home state, including 1 in 3 American women of reproductive age. In New Hampshire, in this chamber, we garnered bipartisan support for the bill last year, but ultimately fell 1 vote short. When we considered this legislation last session, some of my colleagues said we needed to wait for the Supreme Court to act before we took action. For many, a world without Roe seemed impossible. For many more still, the idea that abortion could ever be illegal in New Hampshire seems impossible. I, for one, am not in favor of waiting to see any longer. We must act now to ensure the women of New Hampshire are protected. This bill is not radical. It does not even change state law. Instead, it makes good on something that 71% of Granite Staters support: access to reproductive health care. This bill is about respect for the women who bear the important responsibility of carrying our society's children and their right to personal, physical autonomy. We are women, mothers, and when we are pregnant, our ability to be complex, highly intelligent decision makers doesn't change. I urge you to support an ought-to-pass recommendation for SB 181, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Senator. Are there any questions? Senator Gannon.
Thanks for taking my questions, and I appreciate you coming here today. It's a very topical issue, so it's a good thing. So my peers with your bill, and so the law that I thought was a bipartisan bill that we passed last year, at 24 weeks, it puts us in a camp of a small group. It was only out of 200 and something countries, it's less than 10% allow any abortions after 20 weeks. So I thought we were, with our 24 weeks, we're not an outlier state. The outlier states would be 20 weeks or less. The middle states are 22 to 24 because they're looking for viability. We're at 24 weeks. So to me, it's viability personally is always my big thing. When a baby's viable, like I see 2 separate entities there. Before that, we can have a different argument. So we're in line with 43 states. Is your bill going to now push it up to birth? Your bill would allow a woman to have an abortion up to birth.
So, thank you, Senator Gannon. So just to clarify, what this bill does is it clarifies under New Hampshire law that there is no right to interference prior to the fixed week ban that's already in place under statute. So what the legislature came to consensus on or passed last year was a fixed week ban at 24 weeks. There were some exceptions that were put into place. Following year, this bill in front of you, SB 181, does not seek to change the 24-week sort of
You're not looking to expand.
deadline. Exactly. It really just puts a positive right into law that makes it clear to our constituents that this right exists for them up to that point.
So, the
Follow-up?
problems, yes, follow, thank you. Madam Chair.
Senator Gannon, you need to turn your.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what gave me concern was line 6 and 7, because it is vital to the equality and liberty of all individuals. The state shall not restrict or interfere with the individual's exercise of their private decision. So I didn't see where that cut it off at 24 weeks, or that you said that we're going with the law that we had it, and you're just trying to enact it. To me, it read, when I look at a plain reading of it, it appears open-ended, like someone could say, oh no, you can never interfere with my right between week 24 and week 40. So I'm misinterpreting that, correct?
Well, just if you continue reading on line 8, Senator Gannon, except as provided in RSA 32943 through RSA 32950. So what we're doing here is communicating to our constituents, that this right is positively protected under law, except where there has been previous legislation that affects it.
Okay. One further follow-up?
Yes.
And then I'm great there. Thank you. On viability, see, that's always a sticking point for me, because I hear from everyone, my constituents, so we want to enshrine Roe. Roe medically, if you read the testimony or listen to it, I listen to it more because I don't have that much in the car. It's very convenient to listen to it. So I listened to the testimony. It's always viability. With medical science, now we've saved babies at 21 weeks. Shouldn't we then, if I'm looking to enshrine Roe, be looking for viability and putting it into codifying it that we should have 22 to 24 weeks? Why wouldn't I, if I really want to enshrine Roe, why am I not looking to make it 22 to 24 weeks?
Yeah, respectfully, Senator Gannon, Roe, as you know, as a lawyer, was not a piece of legislation. It was a Supreme Court case. And what we're proposing here today is not related to viability. It's just a positive right that's established around a fixed week
That's all I
ban.
need to know. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Are there any further questions? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Sort of going on that same line of questioning about, these rights under Roe, it was the case that women were guaranteed these rights for nearly 50 years and that, we relied upon those rights. And so is it your position that this bill sort of gives those rights back that were taken away by the Supreme Court?
It's my opinion that we did have rights protected for 50 years because we had a right to privacy interpreted under our Constitution to protect the right to an abortion, as Senator Gannon said, up to viability. In this case, what we're doing is putting into New Hampshire statute a positive right, or rather protection from interference up to the 24-week ban that's previously been put into place. So there are slight differences, but yes, we are acting to restore a right to New Hampshire's women during their term of pregnancy.
Yes, please.
We heard a lot last year about that this wasn't necessary. One, because, we didn't have restrictions in New Hampshire up to 24 weeks. And two, we already had Supreme Court protections. Well, I think we clearly know now that we don't have those Supreme Court protections. But I mean, as I read this, gives affirmatively individuals that right in state law, but it also gives us a private right of action. So isn't that new as well?
It is. I think that losing the right that was protected under Roe versus Wade was a real loss. And so right now, as it stands in New Hampshire law, there is nothing to protect women during these first 24 weeks. Yes, there haven't been any further, well, that's not even true, but currently under state law, there's nothing further to interfere with the right to terminate a pregnancy up to 24 weeks. However, giving New Hampshire's women that protection clearly stated in law, which again is something that 71% of our constituents support, and also giving them remedy is meaningful to them. It clearly establishes what their rights are. It establishes, that again, we're sort of restating our state law in a way that positively creates that right. But I'd also like to point out again that in many ways, it doesn't change our state law because right now, there's been sort of this legislative enactment around a fixed week ban at 24 weeks. So,
Last follow-up?
Yes,
Thank
follow
you,
up.
Madam Chair. My last question is around the direction that we got from the U.S. Supreme Court. Once Roe fell after the Supreme Court issued the Dobbs decision, we heard a lot of folks saying, I don't necessarily agree with this, but we heard a lot of folks saying, okay, maybe you didn't lose the rights. It's just now up to state legislators. So we did hear that. So this bill, isn't this sort of, moving forward with what many said the Supreme Court did, is give this discretion about whether to give these rights to the state legislature. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, Senator Whitley. And I think the decision has been handed to us. It's our responsibility to act, and not to state it again, but 71% of our constituents are looking to us for a clear statement of what their rights are. And I think we owe it to them to give them this protection.
Are there any further questions? Senator Abbas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If Senate Bill 181 as written were to become law, where it says the enforcement lines 10 to 14, can you just give me a hypothetical situation of when that enforcement provision would be applicable?
I think it would be if there was an attempt to interfere, with a woman's right to access her medical care during those first 24 weeks. Then it would give her, or a pregnant person, a private right of action in Superior Court. So it would basically give her a claim to bring relief for damages, which doesn't exist under state law today.
Yes, follow up?
Oh, and thank you, Madam Chair. And you say that the interfering, is that being done by the state itself, or is that being done by a private or state medical facility? I guess where's the, I'm just trying to talk myself through how it would be.
Sure, sort of the practical enforcement. Just reading the plain language of the bill, the state shall not restrict or interfere with an individual's exercise of their private decisions. So I think it would have to be interpreted to be a state action, which I think under New Hampshire law right now is pretty broad, but I know it's still being interpreted, so.
Yes, follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if a private medical facility, for whatever reason, interfered with a woman's health care, would that mean the state would be liable for that?
I'm not a practicing attorney in court, and I can't say that I'm an expert on this case law, but just reading this plain language, I think it would have to be interpreted to be a state action.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Gannon?
Just a quick follow-up. Again, we were talking about, I was talking and we were discussing viability. That's, again, most of our state has problems with, 79% of our state has problems with late-term abortions. They are accepted much more readily the earlier you go. Do you have a problem between, if I was to say, now that it's on the table, look at it at my 22 to 24 weeks where we've saved 21-week-olds. I have a hard time now. If you're looking to codify this for enshrine this into New Hampshire law, I feel almost guilty leaving viable babies at 22 to 24 weeks. Do you not have that same interpretation about 22 to 24 weeks that you're leaving these viable babies behind?
Senator Gannon, respectfully, again, there's nothing in this bill that raises the issue of viability. Personally, I'm aware that there's very complicated medical situations that arise for individuals, and this bill is an affirmative right for them to make those decisions privately with the advice of their doctor.
And again, up to 24 weeks.
Yes, sir. That's what current state law is.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Just clarifying. Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions? You?
Yes.
Okay, Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity again. I don't know if you heard a lot of the testimony that we had in the past 2 years, but the testimony that I heard from a lot of different doctors was that viability is an individual determination, it's a medical determination. Did you hear that testimony also?
I believe I've heard that said, yes.
Okay. My last follow-up is regarding this line of questioning about, who would be liable. And my reading, looking at the plain language of the statute, is that's focused, very clearly on state action, both for, who shall not restrict the action, and then once in terms of who has the private right of action, it's against the state, and that's pretty clear in the statute. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. I mean, I think it's a tough question to answer definitively in this room what that means, but the language of the bill to me is very clear that it's prohibiting the state from restricting or interfering, and that the relief can be sought against the state for injunctive relief. So,
Okay. I have a question.
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
I'm concerned about the enforcement provision as well. And just kind of a hypothetical situation
Okay.
where you have a disagreement between the doctor and the patient about exactly how far along they are. The patient is presenting it 24 weeks and the doctor says, no, you're 25 weeks. And so in that type of a situation, what do you envision happening?
well, Madam Chairwoman, respectfully, that's why it's very hard for us to put fixed week bans on these medical situations. However, that said, I think what we're trying to do here is make it clear that up to week 24, with the best medical advice, the decision about how to proceed with medical care is between a woman and her doctor, and that the state really doesn't have a role there, and that there should not be any interference in that conversation.
I have one last question. There are other laws that have been passed concerning abortion, and I'm thinking of parental notification. Does this touch that at all, or does that stand by itself?
It stands by itself, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Abbas has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe when answering other questions, you said it has to be a state action or type of state interference. If this were to become law, Senate Bill 181 has written, can you just give me an example of what state interference or state action would be that would invoke the enforcement provisions on line 10 through 14?
So, the first example I can think of is some kind of rule or regulation that prohibits medical practitioners from, performing a medically necessary procedure that could be, classified as abortion prior to week 24.
You're all set?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Whitley has another
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I think that other members of the committee sort of are thinking through this, state actor provision. And so it seems to me that, the issue that Senator Carson raised in terms of a private provider, this statute doesn't involve action by private providers. It's really just with state actors. So it would only involve a provider if it was a state provider, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of details to think through there, but what this bill is trying to do is prevent the state from affecting a woman's right to have full access to all medical care that she needs during the first 24 weeks of her pregnancy. So in the case of a private medical provider choosing not to act because of, potentially being week 25 or 24, they would be reacting to what is existing state law right now. It wouldn't be changed by this bill. The state would have to do something between week 0 and 24 to invoke any enforcement under this bill.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, I think I get it.
Okay.
Right now we have two different things here. We have our existing statute.
Right.
And then you would like to take that and put that here in the Roe versus Wade statute. Now, if I hear you correctly, if somebody tries to change that 24 weeks, a state actor being the legislature, then a person who feels that they're going to be harmed by changing that has the right of action. Am I correct in assuming that? Because I'm trying to get my head around, what are you talking about state? Are you talking about the federal government with Medicare and Medicaid, and the state says, we're not dealing with this at all? Is that a state action? I think that part of it really needed to be fleshed out a little more, because I know I'm trying to figure out what you mean by state action. They say, okay, even though it says you can do it here, we're not going to allow it here. Is that a state action? And does that mean you are going to sue the legislature? You're now giving someone the right to sue the legislature. So I'm just trying to get some clarification here.
Yeah, it's fair question, Madam Chairwoman. So what the law says today is that, as of 24 weeks gestation, there are restrictions in place on our patients and our medical providers as to what medical care can be sought, and there are penalties under law for those. We've established some exceptions where patients can seek medical care and doctors can act, and we agreed on those in HB 1609. what this bill does is it says, you know, outside of those laws that have already been passed, the state of New Hampshire protects a woman's right to make a private medical decision. And so in the case that there were regulations or penalties imposed on doctors, or, you know, some kind of regulation around clinics that came through the Department of Health. I mean, there's many hypothetical examples of ways that medical care could be affected, regulated, restricted outside of the legislature changing that 24 weeks. And so what this is doing is it's telling women and pregnant people in New Hampshire, you know, you have this right up to 24 weeks, which again, is not a change to our state law, but it does affirmatively put a right in place and give them a remedy against that right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any
helpful.
further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you,
for your
Senator
testimony.
Harrison. Thank you.
The chair will call Dr. Janet Perkins Howland. Good afternoon, doctor.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I didn't mean to cut anybody. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, please
Okay.
introduce yourself for the record.
I'm Janet Perkins Howland. I live in Durham and I work in Dover, and I'm speaking in my capacity today as an OBGYN. I'm speaking for myself and not for anything for my practice or my hospital, my work. But I wanted to speak to you today in favor of this bill in my experience as a general OBGYN. I practice the majority obstetrics, so I've been really super lucky to be invited into to people's lives and families' lives in their most sort of intimate moments and private moments. And of course, a lot of them are joyful, as you can imagine. And I think that's what we have in mind when we talk about having a baby, but it's also fearful times and vulnerable times and times where they really need some help about what choices to make. So I wanted actually maybe change the conversation about supporting this bill a little, shake it up just a little bit and talk about how I frame my practice in terms of my reproductive care, which is something called reproductive justice. So I hope justice is not really a buzzword or a trigger word from anyone. I really mean justice in the sense of, like in the Pledge of Allegiance, liberty and justice for all, that kind of justice. And the principles of reproductive justice include the right not to have a child, the right to have a child, and the right to raise a child in an environment which is safe and healthy. So I obviously don't have a lot of professional influence over the third part, but I do have some influence over the right to not have a child and the right to have a child. And I think they're both incredibly important. And I think sometimes we when people engage me on a conversation about abortion, they're surprised to hear me say that I think that we need to support both decisions on when to have a child and when not to have a child. And I'm surprised sometimes that where that takes me. And so I just wanted to give you like a couple of vignettes where I've been surprised as a doctor. I've been also lucky not to just practice here in the great state of New Hampshire, but to be able to go overseas and help women in rural Haiti and other countries. And going way out into the countryside, here I am. This was upwards of 20 years ago, going way out in the middle of nowhere and thinking that I'm there to provide either obstetrics care or maybe contraceptive care for these women way out. And what I ended up doing for the week was removing Nexplanons, or Implanons it was called at the time, for women who actually really, really wanted to have a child. And somebody had gone out there a couple years earlier and put in these Nexplanons and they weren't able to have. So I was really, really surprised. And I felt like I did a good job as a doctor to support those women's ability to have a child. So I think it's really helpful to us to sort of talk about we have to support women. Our mission statement and my practice is supporting patients, supporting women with excellence and compassion. So that's what I try to do in my professional life, and that's what I think I would hope and join you to do as a legislative body. Is we can't really, if we have to support people's at various points in their life about when is the best time to have a child and when is not. So that's kind of I work in safety in my hospital as well. I do simulation, but I also do what we call perinatal optimization, which is the idea of having a safe plan of care for everybody who comes on our unit to deliver a baby. So it's not that is my job is shared decision making. So to give you the information that you need to make the best decision. It's not my job to tell you what to do, but to lay it on the table and let you make that. So that's that idea of autonomy and shared decision making that we have in New Hampshire that I think speaks to this bill about that's why I would encourage you to pass this bill. Just one more word about safety before I finish is the safety, forgive me if you guys know this, but it's not necessarily safe to have to deliver a baby, and the safety goes down with increasing gestational age. So I hear conversation about 20 weeks. It's much safer to have an abortion at really early in pregnancy. There's about a 0.6 out of a 100,000 risk of mortality for somebody having an early abortion. And if you go towards 20 weeks and above, the rate becomes closer to the rather unfortunate high number that we have in our country right now, which is about 16 times higher. So it is much safer. I would love to be able to not even be talking about abortion. I think you guys are all familiar with the facts that the more we have access to care and to access to contraception, the less we talk about abortion. So I'd love to be able to work ourselves out of a job here discussing abortion at all and talk more about compassionate care throughout the reproductive history of somebody's lifespan. So I think I'll leave it at that unless you guys have any questions for me.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Gannon?
Just a quick question, because you brought up the issue of reproductive justice. I understand the intent of it, but isn't the outcome, like women of color are like 5 times more likely to have an abortion? Poor women are less likely. Are we economically then, your reproductive justice is going to have phenomenally harder outcomes on individuals who are more challenged economically and in other ways?
Could you clarify that question? Because I'm wondering
Sure.
what you
I
mean
look
by
at the
harder.
number of like 55 million Black babies have been aborted, which disproportionately on high because they put pregnancy, Planned Parenthoods in inner cities. There's other reasons. They're poor. They don't have the money.
Right.
They're challenged. So is the outcome we're aborting a lot more poor women and a lot more women of minority because of your theory for reproductive justice?
Okay, I appreciate the question. I would go back to my my statements about trying to work ourselves out of a job here. And I think that in terms of, I'm listening to you talking about viability, and I feel like we're having the wrong conversation. And a lot of times the conversation is not to get to 22 weeks, but to have that care earlier on. So if we had better access to, I'm incredibly concerned about those numbers, especially for people of color in our country. And for that very reason, I feel like if we are more accessible, I am super worried about having abortion be illegal because it is way more unsafe. And I do feel like marginalized people who don't feel like they have access to care are particularly vulnerable to the bad outcomes for abortion, because unfortunately they don't feel like they have
I'm
a
all
choice.
set. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will call Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair and honorable committee members. My name is Deborah Altschler, and I represent Senate District 24, which includes the towns of Exeter, Greenland, Hampton, Hampton Falls, Northampton, Rye, and Stratham. I am here in support and as a co-sponsor of Senate Bill 181. I will be brief. Privacy broadly protects the right to make medical decisions affecting bodily integrity and health, including decisions about reproduction. In November of 2018, 81% of New Hampshire voters added to our Constitution a right to privacy, an individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private or personal information as being natural, essential, and inherent. Unfortunately, that does not apply to New Hampshire women who are pregnant. Bodily autonomy, the right to control one's own body without influence or coercion, protects personal rights, including access to abortion care. There is no caveat in Article 1 that says all men are born equally free and independent, except when pregnant. And yet that loss of freedom and independence is exactly what happens, resulting in what is in actuality reproductive servitude. Men and women in New Hampshire should both be free from government interference in their reproductive health care decisions. New Hampshire men have enjoyed the default of government being hands off of their choices for generations. At a minimum, New Hampshire should codify a pregnant woman's right to privacy for at least a portion of her pregnancy. I strongly urge the committee to recommend Senate Bill 181 ought to pass.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Senator. Are there any questions? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. And I asked this question to the prior senator that testified. But when it comes to an example of like when there's a state action that would incur, that would invoke the enforcement provisions from line 10 to 14, could you give me a hypothetical situation of when that would be applicable?
I'm sorry, Senator, you're asking me to give you a hypothetical?
If Senate Bill 181 were to
Yes.
become law, can you give me an example of what type of state action would have to incur in order for the enforcement provisions to apply that's articulated in lines 10 to 14?
Can I give you a hypothetical application of this proposal?
I can rephrase the question.
Okay, thank you.
If Senate Bill 181 were to become law as written, and there were to be some type of state action that would occur, or state conduct that would require the enforcement provisions to be applied, because I assume at that point you would then have an injured person. I'm asking, what is an example, what would have to happen under the current law today for those enforcement provisions to be able to be utilized?
I think, as was stated previously from Senator Perkins Quokka, that Senate Bill 181 puts in a positive right and establishing a codified right. And I am incredibly reticent to make up hypotheticals or stories to justify this. I cannot give you a hypothetical story. But if you have, with all due respect, if you have something in mind that you think would apply, I'm happy to entertain that.
I'm just asking, when if this were to become law, what's the circumstances where it would result in a situation where the law would actually be able to be enforced? It has an enforcement provision. I'm just asking, what's an example of something that would have to happen?
I'm sorry, I can't engage in that hypothetical with you. I'm not prepared for that. I think that's beyond the scope, but thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? There's Senator Gannon.
Saying that with viability. I could be much more receptive. It isn't what I want at all. But with viability being somewhere, usually most doctors will say 22 to 24 weeks. And people have been saved as early as 21 weeks. Would you be open to my amendment if I amended it, making it 22 weeks, in line again with Roe v. Wade's viability standard? If I amended this bill from 24 to down to 22, 21 weeks, the earliest which they've saved.
Well, with all due respect, Senator Gannon, I think your proposal would be an amendment to RSA 329.43 through 329.50. And this does not apply to that. So you're looking to, I think what you're saying is you're looking to modify a different statute, and this seeks, and also, with all due respect, I also am not getting what I want here either, because I would prefer the government not interfere in anyone's reproductive health care.
Please do not, if you're going to do that, I'm going to ask you to leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. Next, we're going to call Representative Simpson. Good afternoon, Representative.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me over here. Good to see all of you. Would you like a copy of for the clerk?
Yes, please hand it to our secretary, and we will make sure that everyone has a copy for their records.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Representative Alexis Simpson. I'm from Rockingham District 33, which I represent the people of Exeter, Stratham, Newmarket, and Newfields. I'm here as a co-sponsor of SB 181. I'll speak briefly, as I know there are others behind me who are here to testify as well. As Senator Perkins-Cuoca has already stated, since we introduced this bill last year, the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision is no longer the law of the land. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned, I have heard from my constituents and people across the state that they are scared. They aren't sure if they will have access to the care they need, and they're scared of what the future looks like for their children. It may seem that these fears are overstated, but most of my constituents watch the national news. They have watched as state after state across the country have banned abortion early in pregnancy before people even know they're pregnant, and in some cases banned abortion completely. In a time when people are uncertain about so many things, the cost of housing, electricity, and childcare, to name a few, losing control over your body and the ability to make decisions about the security of your family's future is scary. As a mother myself, I understand those fears. There is no decision more critical than if, when, and how to start and grow a family. I believe we have an obligation to our constituents, the overwhelming majority of whom believe that decisions about reproductive and abortion care belong to pregnant people and to the people who provide them care. Granite Staters are looking to us, their elected officials, right now for clarity and security.
Thank you.
Access to abortion care up to 24 weeks is legal in New Hampshire, and we should reassure our constituents by securing this in statute. Passing the Access to Abortion Care Act will show the people that we understand what is at stake and that we trust them and their doctors. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Representative,
Yes.
It was my understanding that when the law was passed, it was very clear that a woman could have an abortion for any reason that she desired up until the end of the 24th week. Can you please explain to me how that is confusing?
Sure. I believe what it actually is that that a woman is not able to have an abortion after 24 weeks, except in the exceptions that were passed last year. And so this law would put in statute the affirmative right to access to an abortion in the first 24 weeks. So right now, the law is silent on it in a sense. Except it doesn't say it's not prohibited. It just doesn't say that it is guaranteed a right, as the right we had when Roe versus Wade stood.
Thank you for your answer. I'd just like to point out that this reference already refers to something that's already in statute. All that's happening is it's being restated. That's all. It is already in statute, and the law was very clear. I think that the where confusion came in was how it was portrayed and how it was relayed to the people of the state of New Hampshire. And that's extremely unfortunate because it really and truly is about a woman's right and her health care. And unfortunately, that got distorted throughout the political process. But all this does, it has two sections. One, the first section already states what is statute. It's just restating it, verbatim, word for word. And then you have a second section on enforcement, which is new. And I know that I am a little confused about this enforcement part, and I think I can probably speak for some of my colleagues that it is confusing, and we're going to have to get some clarification on that. But all this really does is restate again what is already in statute verbatim.
I think there are a couple questions in there, and I'll try to address them.
Thank you.
Yes. So with all due respect, I think honest brokers in all beliefs about our particular laws on abortion care disagree about how clear the statute is on what is protected affirmatively. So it's very clear that there's a ban on abortion after 24 weeks. Mm-hmm. People disagree, apparently, as you're sharing with me now, on whether abortion is protected affirmatively up to 24 weeks. And so I know when I look at the rest of our neighbors in New England, all the other states in our region affirmatively protect a woman's right to abortion care up until 24 weeks or a certain point. And so what I think is unclear to my constituents and to others with whom I've spoken is that it is not clear in the law that the right to abortion care is protected up to 24 weeks. And it was clear when the Supreme Court, before the Supreme Court Dobbs decision, it was clear that there was access to abortion and that that was a constitutional right. And now that is removed. So one way to approach affirmatively protecting the right to abortion up to 24 weeks is to put it in statute. And you had another question I can...
Yeah. Representative, we could discuss this all day.
We sure could. It seems we disagree.
Really, I'm going to say I disagree with you.
Sure.
I think it is very clearly stated in statute. We had discussions on the floor of the Senate as well as the floor of the House, what the intent of the law was. I think it was very, very clear that there was a 24-week period from the day of conception to the end of the 24th week that a woman could get an abortion, no questions asked, for whatever reason. But the late term, what's called a late term abortion, was what was being stopped. That at that point, the 7th month, the infant is viable. And then the protections are in there for the health of the mother and for fatal fetal anomalies, because no woman should be required to carry a child that has no chance of life. So we were very, very, very clear on that. So when I heard your testimony talking about it's not clear, it has to be stated affirmatively, it already is. It already is, and it's in statute already. So this is where this is a little confusing for me, because we've already done that. So I look and I go, why do we need to restate something that's already in law? And that's the question I have, Representative, and maybe you can answer that for me.
So I tried to answer that a few minutes ago. I think it is true, apparently, that we disagree. And that is why I'm here. I appreciate your hearing this bill. And it is not, my constituents would like to have their right enumerated explicitly in the statute, and they do not feel that that is the case at this point. I'm not sure I have a lot more to say about that, except to say that we disagree. There may be others who will weigh in differently as well. But I think we want it to state affirmatively that we have a right to abortion care up until the 24-week ban.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Whitley has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I think this is a good conversation to sort of flesh out where we are. And I'm looking right now at the Fetal Life Protection Act. That's RSA 329, 43 through 50, which is referenced in this bill. This bill explicitly carves out the Fetal Protection Act. And in looking through sections 43 through 50, would you believe that I'm not able to find that affirmative protection that we're looking for in Senate Bill 81? I see definitions, I see prohibitions, I see reporting, I see criminal penalties, I see civil penalties. I don't see any affirmative rights enumerated in RSA 329, 43 through 50. Would you agree?
Thank you, Senator. I do agree, and that's why I'm here, is to state those rights affirmatively in the statute. I read it that way, and I will say that people come to this genuinely, apparently, reading it both ways. So I think it's important for us to keep studying that and to listen to the testimony that we hear from folks all around on how we read that, because in some ways, if it's not written affirmatively in the statute, our intentions may be one thing, but what's written in the law is what is the law. And that is what I am trying to add something to as a co-sponsor of this bill.
You're all set?
Just one last.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So, there's been good conversation today, I think, about enforcement, like in the role of enforcement and, what we're trying to prohibit here. And I think it's pretty clear, by the plain language of the bill that it's state action that we're trying to prohibit. Right. And, I think there's this question about enforcement. And I remember during the conversations about the Fetal Protection Act, so like these were, robust and sometimes painful conversations, right, about this. We really worked at it. And I remember, we heard from, my friends on the other side of the aisle that they felt that criminal penalties were necessary and civil remedies, but that's not what we're asking for here, correct? Right. We're not even asking for, going as far as criminal penalties, right? We're just asking for, this is a right. And if you have this right, you have to be able to enforce it. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any further questions? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just asked for clarification of your testimony.
Sure.
You said you had constituents that had some confusion or misunderstanding about the existing law in New Hampshire. Were you referring to the 24-week standard or the post 24-week standard that the constituents were confused about?
I think the post 24-week standard's pretty clear. I think there was a lot of conversation about that, both in the Senate and the House, and that seemed to be very clear to people. But then people follow up with, well, what happens in the first 24 weeks? Everything's fine. I'm like, yes, that is legal up until 24 weeks. But it's not stated as an affirmative right, right? So I can't tell people that they can go to the statute and their rights to that kind of health care are right there in the statute next to the ban. So the ban is there in statute. I'm trying to clarify people that their rights are protected and they want to see that in statute. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Senator Whitley.
Would you believe that when I talked to my constituents, I think the confusion was, we had this right. We had this right for 50 years. My mother had this right. Maybe my grandmother had this right. But now that Roe has fallen, I live in the Granite State. What protections do I have? Would you believe that that's where the confusion came after the Dobbs decision removed our rights? Would you believe?
Yes, I would believe that.
Okay, are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Representative. We appreciate your time on the
Thank you,
hot seat,
Senator.
I guess you might call it.
What's that?
I said I appreciate your time on the hot seat.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yes, you did very well. The chair will call Representative Amanda Toll. Really? I was hoping you were going to bring me. We saw you passing the baby around, and
We may disagree on some things, but one thing I think all of us can agree on is how cute Jordy is.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. My name is Amanda Elizabeth Toll, and I represent Cheshire 15, which encompasses the city of Keene, Walpole, Hinsdale, Chesterfield, Surrey, and Westmoreland, New Hampshire. It's a big district. And I ran for office and got elected on a distinctly progressive feminist platform emphasizing reproductive justice, meaning that all people, regardless of race, class, or gender, have the right to make autonomous reproductive decisions and should have the resources and support to do so. In line with this, I represent my constituents by supporting all legislative proposals that affirm reproductive justice and strongly oppose all the bills that interfere with reproductive freedom. I'm here today to speak in support of the Access to Abortion Care Act, SB 181. This legislation will mean that the state cannot further interfere in the right to access abortion care. Both nationally and here in New Hampshire, we've seen an erosion of abortion rights. With the end of Roe versus Wade, many state legislatures are passing abortion access barriers, and millions of people have lost access to abortion in their home state. Even though the Granite Staters are overwhelmingly pro-choice, in 2021, New Hampshire advanced a budget that specifically attacked reproductive rights, including a gestational ban and a mandatory ultrasound requirement. Both were extremely unpopular, and the ultrasound mandate for all abortion care was ultimately overturned. It is critical to put abortion protections into state statute to protect further erosion. This bill doesn't change New Hampshire law, but it draws the line in the sand to fend off potential further attacks that could harm Granite Staters who need to access abortion care. Finally, I also want to speak in support of this legislation, not just as a legislator, but as a mother and someone who earlier in my life needed abortion care. I had an abortion when I was a teenager. Approximately 8 weeks ago, I gave birth to my second child, Jordan. It hasn't been easy. I got a terrible case of PUPS while pregnant, needed iron transfusions, and now am extremely fatigued often due to my son's frequent waking at night. My son is such a blessing, and I love him beyond measure. I'm grateful to care for him with the most wonderful, loving partner by my side. But parenting is likely one of the hardest things one can do, and it shouldn't be forced upon people. Because I was able to have children when I was ready and not before that, I've been able to become a state representative who's advocating for public policy based in compassion and justice. I'm tremendously grateful for being able to obtain the abortion care I needed when I was younger. Sharing my own story for years and hearing the stories of others, I know one thing is for sure. Abortion care is an intersectional issue. People of all economic classes, races, and religions access abortion care. Legal barriers to abortion will not stop abortions. They will only keep disenfranchised folks from accessing the care they need, sometimes with deadly results. As government officials, our goal should be to expand access to care, not to limit it. Please support SB
HB 181 Access to Abortion Care Act today. Thank you so much for hearing my testimony.
Thanks for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope you get a lot of sleep.
And congratulations on the.
If I'm correct, I think we're up to Laura Alazine.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I was going to say one thing, but I wanted to just point out there have been 4 or 5 times as I've been sitting here listening that I've heard people talk about abortion rights and abortion rights being taken away. By the way, I'm Laura Alazim from Londonderry. Sorry about that. The Roe versus Wade decision wasn't just wrongly decided. In the Dobbs decision, they called it egregiously wrong. They said it must be overruled, and I'm reading directly from the decision. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. So when we talk about giving an affirmative right to women in New Hampshire, that's a radical step. It's not a restoration of anything. That was a make-believe right. And to suddenly put it into law is going to muddy the waters. It's going to create a lot of uncertainty and problem. 2/3 of the voting people in New Hampshire, although many of them are pro-choice, want restrictions in the second trimester of pregnancy. If the legislature were to very sensibly respect these wishes and attempt to roll back some of the restriction from 24 weeks, which, by the way, puts us right on the doorstep of a club with China and North Korea and other people I don't aspire to be like when it comes to human rights. If they were to roll back from 24 weeks to 23 or 22 or 21, this would create a big fat problem. And even worse, well, maybe not worse, but one of the reasons for this, in my opinion, is because then this creates a public relations nightmare for anybody who wants to try to restrict abortion the way that 2/3 of the people in this state wish to have it restricted. Suddenly then we're removing a right. We're not just changing the abortion statute. And I think that that's a huge problem. Roe is gone because it was wrong, not because somebody took something away. And I hope that you will vote this inexpedient to legislate. And in the future, do please respect the opinions of the 2/3 of voters who would like to see abortion restricted even further than 24 weeks. Any questions?
No, thank you for your testimony.
Senator Gannon, your mic.
I'll steal you for a sec, just I wasn't sure Senator Carson's. I think it's just yellow, but I didn't know if she had more to. Oh, she's back. Never mind. So we just did Laura Elazine, and I didn't know if you're just jumping around.
The chair will call, is it Mary Ann Cooper? Is that it? Is Ms. Cooper here? Okay, guess not. Okay, how about Kelly Omu?
Thank you, boss. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Omu. I'm a resident of Jaffrey, and some of you might remember me from when I came to testify before you all just one day before my abortion last year. Yep, I spent my last day of my pregnancy with the Executive Council. I'm here to paint you a quick picture of why I support Senate Bill 181. 376 days or so ago, I was sitting here pregnant and filled with anxiety that I had to fight for my rights just the day before getting a medically necessary abortion. Just weeks prior,
I saw an ultrasound that crushed my hopes and dreams. At that appointment, my doctors at the fetal maternal medicine office in Elliott Hospital told us there was no chance our fetus would make it full term based on the amount of swelling. When given the options to stay pregnant and deliver my first child as a stillborn, I just didn't feel like that was the right choice for me. And I was scared of what it could do to my health, let alone the emotional consequences of dealing with people asking me about a pregnancy I knew was non-viable. The option we chose was an abortion, and as much as I would have loved to get my abortion through my provider at Elliott, I was forced to travel to Boston for that abortion, wading through a crowd of protesters screaming at me for terminating a pregnancy I was so desperately wanting to keep. So after going through the procedure alone in a small, cold operating room, you all were on my mind. As tears trickled down my face, I thought, this isn't right. I thought of you as I laid awake all night. And I thought of the people in situations like mine who just wanted to have access to health care, but instead had to jump through hoops because of the politics of abortion. My personal experience helped me go from feeling numb to feeling so alive after coming here, because I know my daughter is guiding me to do this advocacy work. This tattoo is an enlarged copy of my daughter's footprints. They were only the size of the tip of my pinky. The name Mariposa, which means butterfly in Spanish, came to me around the time I knew I needed to come here to speak up. Mariposa is the reason abortion needs to be safe, legal, and accessible in New Hampshire. Please stop forcing mothers, survivors of rape and incest, and very, very busy OBGYNs to come here time and time again to beg for your mercy. Please let abortion remain a decision between a pregnant person and their health care provider. In our live free or die state, I beg you all to stop chipping away at our rights, to stop making decisions that don't leave room for nuances or situations like mine. Nuances of situations like mine. I beg you all to pass Senate Bill 181 and ensure the right to abortion as we have it stated in our law now. Let it become solidified. I shouldn't have to come here time and time again. This could be one of your hypothetical situations in a sense. I don't need you guys getting involved in my process. You guys were involved in my process, and that's why I advocated for the fetal fatal anomaly exceptions. But had they not been there, this gives me the right to say, I can get it, and you can't stop me from getting it, as the way the law is written. So that's why I support it.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions? That's
too bad.
Senator Carson, your mic.
Thank you very much. No, it was me. I hadn't turned my microphone on. The chair will call Josie Pinto.
Hello, legislators. My name is Josie Pinto, constituent of Dover, and I'm the executive director of the Reproductive Freedom Fund of New Hampshire. We are an organization that works to ensure patients can access abortion through providing them funding for the procedure, rides to their appointments, and emotional support. I'm here to express my strong support for SB 181 relative to access to abortion care. As our organization deals with the fallout of half of our country banning abortion, there has never been a more important time for us to protect the right to abortion here in New Hampshire, which we know from previous testimony that nearly 70% of Granite Staters support. Despite personal opinions on the topic, abortion is an incredibly safe medical procedure. Abortion pills are safer than Tylenol. The residents of our state deserve to know that despite what happens at the Supreme Court or what other states decide, they will be guaranteed access to abortion up until 24 weeks. SB 181 wouldn't change anything about our existing law, but it would solidify it, giving Granite Staters a clear answer to where our laws stand. Personally, we've dealt with a lot of confusion around where current legislation stands with the patients we serve. So I know that this bill would be a welcome solution for our patients. If we as Granite Staters truly believe in bodily autonomy, medical privacy, and the rights of all New Hampshireites to pursue liberty, we must codify the rights of all into law so that we can then begin the true work of ensuring equal access and true reproductive and maternal justice. So I urge you all to vote in favor with the majority of Granite Staters stating that they want the right to abortion to be protected here in New Hampshire. I urge you all to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Emma Savigny.
Thank you, members of the committee, for hearing this testimony. My name is Emma Savini. I am the Children's Behavioral Health Policy Director or Coordinator at New Futures. I'm here on behalf of my colleague, Jake Berry, who's the Vice President of Policy at New Futures. New Futures appreciates the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 181. Because it would ensure access to critical reproductive care for individuals and families in need. When Roe versus Wade was overturned in June last year. Since then, a third of women have lost access to abortion in their home state. You've heard many statistics about that today. Restrictions of abortion have significant impacts on the health and wellness of women, children, and families. For instance, years after abortion denial, women are more likely to not have enough money to cover basic living expenses. Poverty increases the likelihood that a child will be exposed to factors that can impair their brain development and lead to poor academic and health outcomes. This is toxic stress, or otherwise commonly referred to adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And those ACEs will lead to significant health concerns down the line, or can lead to significant health concerns down the line. Additionally, women who are denied access to abortion care have poor health outcomes associated with their pregnancy, including more life-threatening conditions, more chronic pain, gestational hypertension. This bill would ensure that women and families in New Hampshire have access to the vital health care decision of abortion, which supports the health and wellness of our state. Therefore, New Futures urges the committee to vote Senate Bill 181 ought to pass. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? I just have a quick question for you.
Sure.
I just want to make it clear that the points that you made were not in relation to New Hampshire. It looks more like where women have lost all access to abortion and were forced to carry a child. Here in New Hampshire, women have the right to an abortion up until the end of the 24th week. So these things would not necessarily apply. Am I correct?
I mean, absolutely correct. Up to today in New Hampshire, people do have the right up to 24 weeks to have an abortion. This law, Senate Bill 181, would do as you've heard from many people, clarify the law to make it an affirmative right in New Hampshire to have abortion. The statistics I provided and the information I provided is what could be at stake if these rights are chipped away further, or this right is not enshrined and later down the line completely eroded in the state.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? Senator Whitley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for taking my question. You've heard a lot of this conversation about, what current law is. And I don't know if you're a lawyer also, but is it your understanding that women have a right to abortion right now up to 24 weeks, or that there are no prohibitions up to 24 weeks?
So I will say I'm not a practicing attorney anymore, but I was. And I will say that I think the interpretation from several speakers that you've heard today, where the law is just silent on the 24-week right to abortion, so to speak, it's silent. So there's no affirmative right, and this law would just give the affirmative right to abortion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will call Elizabeth Canada.
Good afternoon. For the record, Liz Canada, like the country. I'm the advocacy manager at Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund and Planned Parenthood of Northern New England. There's three things coming your way. One is an Access to Abortion Care Act letter with coalition partners and community organizations such as ACOG, New Hampshire Medical Society, Bi-State, in support of this legislation. There's also a map that shows what are the current restrictions across the country in terms of how restricted abortion is versus how protected. And also our written testimony, which is going your way too. So last year, this committee paved the way to pass House Bill 1609. There's been some discussion about that already, but House Bill 1609 added critical exceptions for fatal fetal diagnosis to the abortion law. House Bill 1609 passed both chambers with broad bipartisan support, which is very much in alignment with how things have gone for decades in the State House in terms of reproductive rights. But in June of 2022, Roe v. Wade was overturned. We've talked about that quite a bit today. And that has meant that 20 million people in the country have lost access to abortion in their home state. Specifically, 1 in 3 women have lost access to abortion in her home state. So the result has been a domino effect throughout the country. Patients have to travel if they are able to afford it, if they can find childcare, if they can take time off of work. They have to travel further, and they have to travel farther in their pregnancy to be able to access the care as states ban abortion. And they travel to places like Northern New England because they view it as safer. It's a safer area in the country. They see it that way. Now, I heard a question earlier about a hypothetical example of what this bill would do if it were passed into law. So a hypothetical example could be that a patient traveling from another state, maybe they're using out-of-state license plates, a state trooper waiting outside of a health center stops them from going inside, because we know other states are trying to pass laws to prevent patients from traveling. So in terms of hypothetical example, that could be the state interfering in that way, a state trooper stopping someone from going in a health center with out-of-state plates. I'm not an attorney, but that is the crux of a potential example there. Now, we've heard from many folks today, the majority of Granite Staters support the right to abortion access. They want abortion to be free from government interference. In August of 2022, 2 months after Roe v. Wade was overturned, polling from St. Anselm showed that abortion support was at a historic high here in New Hampshire. We've seen in additional polling immediately after the election that a supermajority of Granite Staters support the right to an abortion, and nearly 2/3 of Granite Staters want their state legislators to pass a law that puts into state law the right to an abortion, for abortion access. So this bill in front of you is an opportunity to do that very thing. It shows Granite Staters that, like we've heard over the past few months, especially since 1609 was signed into law, that abortion will remain safe and legal up until 24 weeks. It does not change any of the current laws that are on the books. It does not impact the 24-week abortion ban that's on the books. It doesn't impact parental notification, which I heard earlier. It doesn't impact either of those. It just puts in the direct right into state law that the state will not interfere. So Senate Bill 181 is a win-win in that way. It provides critical assurances that our state will not alter course now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. Granite Staters are watching as other states are banning abortion, and they want to know, what is New Hampshire going to do now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned? Last session, it had not yet been, but now it has, and Granite Staters want to see what their legislators are going to do. So this bill would enshrine into state law that we value and support an individual's personal and private decision-making in accessing the health care that they need. So we urge you to support Senate Bill 181 and vote ought to pass.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for taking my question. You mentioned some of those, I think one term is like extraterrestrial statutes, meaning if someone were to travel out of state for medical treatment, could their domicile state prosecute them? Are you aware of any of those laws being challenged at the appellate level or to the Supreme Court?
States are, so as from what I understand right now, states are attempting to pass those types of laws. So that would be something that we would be looking at. We know that there will likely be legal challenges. We know that to be true. But I was just trying to give an example of what that might look like. Whether or not another state changes their law, that could be a way for New Hampshire, the state, to interfere in someone's ability.
And just to follow up, is there any legal challenges pending though to the laws like that? I know it wouldn't be New Hampshire, but
I would have to check to see where I'm not following every single state and every single legal challenge, but I will check because I know that I have that information just not with me today.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for taking my question. You mentioned a poll that was recently done this summer.
August 2022.
Okay, so in that poll, was there an affirmative question about whether Granite Staters wanted affirmative protections in state law for abortion rights?
I would have to look at exactly how, thank you for the question. I would have to look at exactly how the question was framed. I'm happy to send that information to you afterward, to the whole committee afterward.
Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Senator Gannon?
2 questions. One was on your poll. Was that dealing with trimester, or was it just saying we favor allowing abortion? Was it specific in the time period?
I believe it had elements of different parts of a pregnancy, but I am happy to send you that exact poll.
So
follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, following Senator Carson's thought, I don't see that you're going to get anything other than, are you getting more than just feel-good legislation? We're going to have the same law in place. A later legislature could change what we do. We already have the rules at 24 weeks, fetal fatal exception, rape and incest in the early stage. So we're going to have the same laws. Are we really accomplishing anything here to affirmatively do it as opposed to maybe neutrally doing it the other way?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So I think I have 2 answers to that question, and I hope I don't lose track of both of them. Let's see how I do. The first one being, my understanding of the Fetal Health Protection Act is at the very end of it, I believe, there's something that says that there's a right to abortion, that this section doesn't give a right to an abortion. So this would be putting that affirmative right up until 24 weeks, still remaining where the law is. It would be putting that into law. The other part is, since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, it has caused tremendous chaos and confusion throughout the country. There are patients who are in their home states not sure what their laws are in that moment because things were changing so rapidly after the Supreme Court decision came out. And Granite Staters here, I think a question came up earlier around 24 weeks versus before. It was still really confusing because what does Roe v. Wade mean versus our state law and how does that impact? So this gives a very clear line. This is where we are in New Hampshire. We are protecting this. We are making sure the state does not interfere. We are not touching the 24-week ban. We are keeping that where it is. But we are showing Granite Staters that this is what we value. We value bodily autonomy, personal privacy, and our freedom to make decisions for our health care. So it would put that affirmative into the law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I always get another question. Senator Gannon just makes my mind turn a little bit. So, he mentioned sort of like, what's the point of this, essentially, was the thrust of his question. What's the point of this? Is it just a feel-good thing? And I think, as a woman, I was able to go to college, to law school, get married when I was ready, have a child when I was ready. Really the best thing I've ever done was become a mom. But I did it when I was ready because I had an affirmative right to abortion if necessary, right? And that right was affirmed by the Supreme Court. It was a right that we had, right? That said that no that the state is not permitted to interfere with abortion rights. And there was this viability framework. So I had that right. So my understanding is that right was taken away from me, right, when the Supreme Court decided Dobbs. So to me, this doesn't feel like a feel good. This is giving me a right that was taken away from me. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree. It's putting it in black and white into state law, right next to the restrictions, putting the protections right there into state law too.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any further? Yeah.
So what right was taken away? Because to me, it's the same exact thing.
So there's no federally constitutional protections anymore. That right was taken away with Roe v.
But
Wade
under
being
state
overturned.
law.
But right now in state law, there is no direct state law that protects it. We're the only state in New England that doesn't have a state law on the books to show the protections for abortion.
It says under the federal section 3244, I don't have line numbers, I'm sorry. You can't do an abortion in 24 weeks. So it seems pretty clear to me. You say tomato, I say tomato, we have the same law.
And later on in that same, a few RSAs down, it shows that there is no right to an abortion. It does not give a right to an abortion with that later on. I think I don't remember the number, but it's
Thank
last one or second to last one.
Follow-up.
Sure.
Senator Whitley.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at the statute right now, and I'm looking at section RSA 329, section 49. And would you believe it reads, nothing in this subdivision, which is the Fetal Protection Act, shall be construed as creating or recognizing a right to abortion. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, thank you. I don't have it in front of me, so I appreciate that.
Okay, I just have a quick question, and it just was brought on by something that you said. So if the federal government decides that they want to pass a law that says a woman has a right to an abortion, we would not need this.
I mean, theoretically, but we are not in that place right now. Right now, there are no protections and no laws to protect abortion rights in the country in that way, as a federal protection, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair will call Courtney Reed.
Thank you, Chair Carson and members of the committee. My name is Courtney Reed, and I serve the American Civil Liberties Union of New Hampshire, and I'm here to provide a statement of support for SB 181. Last week, we should have celebrated what would have been the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. However, we're now facing the devastating impacts of that ruling being overturned to families and communities across the country. And although post-Dobbs, abortion is still legal in New Hampshire, there are no affirmative protections in place for the right to have an abortion. And at the national level, we've seen 66 clinics in 15 states stop offering abortion care, while 12 states have banned abortion outright. And despite the fact that 1 in 4 women are likely to have an abortion at some point in their lifetime, as many as 1 in 3 women nationally no longer have access to abortion within their own state. And a lot of states have come to this place of extreme limits on access to abortion through passive incrementalism. So I'd like to point out Texas as an example. In 2005, Texas issued a 24-week abortion ban. And in 2013, the state issued a 20-week ban with few exceptions. Years after that, we've seen attacks on abortion access through changing insurance policies and through targeted restrictions on reproductive health clinics. And finally, in 2021, the state issued a 6-week or near total abortion ban. Where we are in the Granite State now is where Texas was in 2005. We currently have a 24-week abortion ban that was passed 2 years ago, and there will always be politicians eager to chip away at abortion access like we've seen happen in Texas over the years. 72% of polled Granite Staters identified as pro-choice in 2022, and nationally, last fall, we saw every ballot initiative go towards strong support of protecting abortion rights, even in deeply red states like Kentucky. Granite Staters are concerned and worried about their future right to abortion, an essential component of reproductive health care. It's time to make explicit that abortion is protected here in New Hampshire because we don't have any affirmative protections under New Hampshire law. Protecting abortion access is part of a battle for racial equity, public safety, for privacy, and for so much more. So I'd like to urge the committee to support this bill and recommend it ought to pass. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony this afternoon. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for taking my question.
Thank you.
So if I understand if this were to become law, Senate Bill 181 as written, if there's concerns about what the future legislators of New Hampshire may do, wouldn't any action they do in part also repeal what if this law? Or Senate
Right.
Bill 181?
So concerns about this legislation in the future. I think this could be overturned in future sessions, but we've seen, based on the polling that I referenced and conversations that constituents have had with their elected officials, this policy is widely popular, as after Roe's been overturned, there's no longer an affirmative protection to abortion access, which is what this law would do until it would be overturned in a future session. So it's just a protection that would, I think, assure Granite Staters that they have the affirmative right to abortion that they don't have in statute at this moment.
Follow-up. If New Hampshire went down the same path as Texas, I'm not recommending that we do it. I'm not taking a position on that. I'm just saying if that were to be the trend, wouldn't that following that trend in part be repealing what this law would create? And that's just, I guess my point is, how is this protecting the rights? Because it just as easily can be repealed down in future by future legislators.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Senator. In order to, if this law were to be put in place, in order to continue to chip away at those rights, this law would have to be repealed, which would serve as some sort of protection that we don't have at all within that 24-week period. And I'm happy to send you some more information on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Okay, Senator Gannon.
Just a quick question. Is there a point at fetal development that you would say that the child, baby, infant, fetus, whatever you want to say, has a life and liberty interest?
Thank you for your question, Senator. The American Civil Liberties Union avoids viability concepts as it kind of puts into talking points when or when not someone might be able to seek access to abortion. And I think granting access or not granting access in terms of viability kind of excludes these cases where individuals may be facing a very difficult decision at a later point in pregnancy, which shouldn't be interfered with by the state. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thank you very much.
The chair will call Devin Quinn.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time. My name is Devin Quinn. I'm the Director of Policy for the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. The Women's Foundation invests in equality and opportunity for New Hampshire women and girls through research, education, advocacy, and grant making. What's coming around to you right now is my written testimony, but also a issue brief we put out quarterly called Gender Matters. This issue brief we came out with last summer is on abortion rights in New Hampshire. This is a fact-based resource. It's not in particular to any specific bills or laws or our positions on them. It's just supposed to be a resource and a tool when you're talking about really any abortion-related legislation. So I hope it is helpful. It goes over the history of laws in New Hampshire, also provides some context for the region. And you'll see that New Hampshire kind of sticks out as the only state in New England that has not protected the right to abortion in state law. You can see in that red bars there that other states in New England do have abortion bans at 24 weeks or at viability, like New Hampshire does. Some of them are very different than New Hampshire's, but they still have them. However, every single other state, regardless of whether or not they have an abortion ban or not, also chose to codify the right to abortion before that. So that is different. That's the last, New Hampshire would be the last state that hasn't done that. The Women's Foundation supports SB 181, the Access to Abortion Act, because women deserve bodily autonomy and the right to make decisions about their own health and health care. I also want to add to the conversation that you've heard in your testimony so far about the economic impacts that happen when women have access to a full suite of reproductive health choices, including abortion. Deciding whether and when to have a child is the most consequential decision relative to a woman's lifetime economic well-being. Women who have access to abortion are more likely and have higher rates of high school and college graduation. They can invest in school and job training for their long-term earning potential, and there are intergenerational impacts as well, both to the next generation in terms of previously born children and subsequent children. Those generational impacts are lower poverty and higher rates of high school graduation and college attendance. So the access to care is critical for disrupting cycles of poverty between generations. So we support this bill because access to reproductive health care, including abortion, is crucial to women's health, economic security, and long-term impacts for their families.
Just looking at the material you gave us. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Quinn? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will call Bob Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm glad to be back with you today. I just have a couple of comments that I'd like to make, and I'd like to start off to comment on the state action piece. And sitting back there and listening to the questions and the answers, the thing that keeps coming into my mind is that this is a Senate bill that wants to be a CACR. And I think that the questions that Senator Abbas was just asking brought that out, that, you know, the bill on its face doesn't change anything substantively in the law. And to the extent that it wants to try to ensure that nothing changes in the future, it can't do that because a subsequent legislature is always going to be able to take different action. Now, just a couple of comments on the policy, which it will not surprise you is something that we disagree with. First of all, what is included here under this policy, and I've mentioned this before in this committee, and if I repeat myself a lot in this, I apologize, but I know that and we all know that in certain places that prenatal diagnoses of things like Down syndrome lead to abortion. And so if the state, for the first time, makes the affirmative statement that it is vital to the equality and liberty of all individuals that the state shall not restrict or interfere with an individual's exercise of their private decision to terminate a pregnancy, those sorts of abortions are included within that finding, that affirmative statement. So I just want to make sure that everybody recognizes that fact. Secondly, I ask that when you're considering legislation like this, that you consider how it resonates in other circumstances. We would probably all agree that from different perspectives and in different contexts, that human dignity and solidarity are principles that are beset by a lot of challenges in this day and age. And to say that certain human beings are beyond the pale, to make an affirmative statement on the part of the state that certain human beings are beyond the pale, is something that is not, in my view, going to help to advance the cause of human dignity and human rights in other contexts. If we want to recognize the human dignity of the young human being at the border, or the human dignity of the young human being who's homeless, or the human dignity of the young human being who is in need of health care, then we need to recognize the human dignity of the young human being in the womb as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Dunn. Are there any questions for Mr. Dunn? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony. The chair will call, I think it's Richard LeLearn? Okay, I'm sorry, and I was, La Plume, okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, first of all, let me tell you that I'm very nervous. I don't usually witness in front of such a distinguished panel as yourself, and I don't even have a suit, coat, and tie. But I want to tell you, I got no papers to pass out, which you might be thankful for. And I just have a short statement here. If I can open it. Here we go. Let me start by saying I am pro-life and will always be. And here I am, standing to express my views for the pro-life and hopefully for many others that are so inclined. While reading an op-ed article by Judith Seltzer, the CEO of Planned Parenthood, on Sunday the 22nd, I found it very interesting that although there are on average 1.2 million abortions performed in the U.S. and some 20 to 30 million legal abortions worldwide, and I being only a male, what can I possibly know about the issues of women's health? But can anyone here tell me what abortions have to do with women's health? In the article, Judith Seltzer of Planned Parenthood suggested that a candle be put in every pro-choice window. Good idea. However, may I suggest a candle be placed in every window for every aborted child whose life was terminated by the horrific procedure that is allowed to happen in the name of women's health. Thank you for allowing me to testify in defense of the unborn and voiceless. May God guide you in your deliberations. Oh, by the way, I'm opposed to 181. You have a nice day, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none? Nope, you're all set. Thank you. The chair will call Patricia Mullen. I think that's correct.
I'm sorry about my clapping. I've never been here before.
Nope, that's okay. It's the first time for everything. You're fine.
Hello, my name is Patty Mullen. I'm a resident of Sunapee, New Hampshire, and I'm here in support of SB 181. The reasons for the support of the bill have been clearly stated, I think, so I'm not going to bother with any of that. What I do want to do is share my story as to why I believe that women and families have a right to complete privacy in making one of the hardest decisions of anybody's life. My mom had 4 daughters. My sister Deirdre, who is 18, my sister Deirdre, and then she had me 18 months later. I was considered an Irish twin. And 7 years later, she had another set of twins, twin girls. So my mom had 4 daughters. My father, my biological father, was an abusive alcoholic and a traveling salesman. And a few months after the twins were born, my mother discovered that when my father traveled in his sales, he also married other women. So at that point, she was 27 with 4 daughters, 2 of them 3 months old, and had a 3-time bigamist as a husband. From that point on, for quite a few years, we lived in the projects. We were on welfare. We were almost homeless a couple of times. But Mom did manage to keep us together. When I was 11, my mother married a New York City fireman with a shield. And the reason I specify with a shield is because in New York City, a fireman and police officers do not call them badges as we do in the rest of this country. They are called shields, and there is a purpose for that. I do not say the name of my stepfather. I call him the evil one. The evil one bought a nice home for my mom and her 4 daughters, and he moved the 5 of us in. The 4 of us spent the rest of our childhoods being raped, beaten, spiritually, emotionally, and physically abused. Occasionally, we would call the police, but the evil one had a shield. My sister Deirdre died from suicide this past July, my Irish twin. She was a brilliant woman, graduated while raising 3 brilliant children. She graduated from Fordham University with her MSW and a 4.0 average. Her children are Fulbright scholars, Rhodes scholars. They have gone to the United World Colleges. A brilliant, brilliant family that I come from. When Deirdre was 62, she started noticing that her memory was going, and it started going fast. So I advised a neurologist. She went and discovered that she had multiple brain injuries. The reason that she had these is because the evil one used to take us by our hair and beat our heads against the floors and the walls or wherever else he could beat us. Because he was a fireman, he had steel-toed boots. And so he would often use his boots to kick us in the head and the body. Deirdre died from the beatings. My sister tried to protect us throughout the years with him. She saved my life when I was 16 years old. My period was 2 weeks late. I was terrified. I was always terrified. I told Dee, and she took me for a urine test. By now, my period was 3 weeks late. I found out I was pregnant at 8 weeks. I will always remember her words. Jesus Christ, Patty, if he finds out, he's going to beat you to death. I knew that this was literally my reality, that this was literally my truth. We scheduled an abortion. It would take another 2 weeks. Those were the longest weeks of my life. I was 11 weeks pregnant when I had my abortion. Everyone here needs to understand that everyone has a personal reason to choose abortion. And no one chooses it lightly. My child would be 42 right now. My reason was abject fear of being beaten to death. One of my therapists once told me that in 30 years of practice, my childhood was the worst she had ever heard. I am here today speaking to you, literally here today speaking to you, only because I had access to an abortion. And that was before Roe v. Wade, because New York City made them legal earlier. My sister, if you think I'm being overly dramatic, died this summer of suicide from traumatic brain injuries because she was losing her mind. I have a daughter now, a beautiful, educated, kind, generous young woman. I cannot fathom why she should be denied access to the reproductive rights that I have had, or that her daughter should be denied. I knew what was best for me at 16. No one was protecting me. The choice I made was the first time in my 16 years of life that I was able to protect myself. Access to abortion must be available. Each of our lives and circumstances are different, but no matter our reason, each of us must have access to abortion personally, behind closed doors, free from government intrusion and interference. No one else knows our stories. None of you knew mine or what was best for my life. Reproductive rights saved my life. Abortion saved me from being beaten to death. Please vote or to pass on SB 181, and thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Mullen. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Jason Hennessy. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Jason Hennessy. I am the president of New Hampshire Right to Life, and I'm here to represent our thousands of pro-life people here in New Hampshire. We oppose SB 181 on two grounds. The first one is that, at least according to my high school and college civics courses, you can't bind a future legislature. Now, I realize there's a lot of lawyers here, so I don't mean to impinge on your noble profession. However, that's what I remember, is that if you want to bind a future legislature, you have to pass a constitutional amendment. And so SB 181 would not actually accomplish the goals that it sets forward to do. So that would mean that it's basically a virtue signal. And you heard several questions, primarily from Senator Abbas, on what are some practical examples of this. And at least in my hearing, I did not hear any that sounded enforceable, at least clearly. So if this is going to be a virtue signal, then the question is this the right virtue that we want to signal? So I don't think it's a good look to ever enshrine human oppression into our law. I mean, we all agree on bodily autonomy. If this was just one person, that there would be no question. I don't think you'd have any opposition. But many of us believe that there's two people, that the unborn child is a human too, who deserves rights. And if that person deserves rights, then having a law that enshrines the ability to end their life, that doesn't go down in history very well. Most of the atrocities that you can think of in human rights in the past are revolving around the question of who is a person and what rights do they deserve. And so if that's what our goal is and that's the primary function of government, is to protect rights, is this law advancing that interest? Just in the interest of talking about the New Hampshire poll from August, one of the outcomes of that is that about over 70% of New Hampshire agrees with abortion restrictions at some point. So this law wouldn't even necessarily reflect the attitude of most New Hampshire citizens. I also wanted to talk a little bit about one of the justifications I heard, which is that there's a lot of constituents that are confused about what the abortion laws are in New Hampshire. I took the liberty of searching for it while I was sitting in the audience, and I just typed in New Hampshire abortion laws. And the first one that came up was Planned Parenthood, which says as its first main sentence, abortion remains safe and legal in New Hampshire, but there are a few restrictions. The first line of Wikipedia is that abortion in New Hampshire is legal up to the 24th week of pregnancy. And then the second one was Find Law, which says, summary, abortion is legal in New Hampshire through 24 weeks. So rather than documenting this in law, I would recommend that those constituents go to Google. The only other thing, I heard a couple of statements saying that our surrounding states in New England have passed these affirmative rights to abortion. As a New Hampshire resident who comes from one of those other states, there are a lot of things I don't like about those states, which is why I live in New Hampshire. And I don't think that that's a compelling reason to pass that law. For instance, I don't think we should pass an income tax or a sales tax. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the chair will call the final speaker.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak up. My name is Maria Perez. I'm a state representative from District 43. But today I'm speaking on behalf of my sister, which is no longer here, Blanca Yesenia Rodas. She passed away almost 30 years ago. She was raped by my own father. It's like myself. I was a victim of my own father. My mother never believed us. I was a victim since I was 5 years old, until my parents decided to marry me to someone who was 47 years old. When I moved to this country, I was 15 years old. When I moved here, I was a victim of domestic violence myself. I stayed in that relationship for 11 years. Why that I'm sharing that story? Because my sister, she didn't have the opportunities. She died from HIV. She couldn't take the pain of being raped by my own father. He wasn't her father. She got pregnant when she was 15. When she died, she realized that she had HIV, and she had twins that were born with HIV. I hear many stories, and I see many stories of victims of human trafficking. I'm here to be the voice of the human trafficking victims myself. I was raped when I was trying to get here at the border. I was a victim of sexual assault at the border. I'm asking you, I'm not asking you for much. I'm asking you to confirm the victim like myself and victims of human trafficking that will still have the right, because a lot of victims, they get high and they don't have the rights. And when they figure it out, they have the rights too late. We already have the struggles of being abused. Their rights already been violated. What I'm asking you is to give us, as a humans and as a victims, the right to know and affirmation that we still have the right, even after 24 weeks. If someone is a victim of human trafficking, they can still have the right to abortion. I never had an abortion, but I'm here to ask you to support SB 181. Because I don't want to see another victim like my sister pass away from HIV. Because she didn't have the opportunities, she didn't have the protection that she needed when she was young. I have 2 siblings. They're 18 years old with HIV, and they don't have a mother, they don't have a father, because their father was the one passed the HIV to my sister. Please support HB 181. That's all I'm asking you. I'm not asking you to give us any more access, more than 24, but I'm asking you to at least give the access to victims of incest and human trafficking past the 24 weeks if we have to. That's all I'm asking you.
Thank you very much for your testimony this afternoon. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Whitley?
Not a question, but I think there was someone who wanted to speak also. If we had one, I don't know if their name was on there.
No, that's the last one I had signed up. So thank you very much, Representative, for your testimony. I don't have anyone else who has signed up to speak.
Is Reverend Allison Pong?
Okay, if you would like to speak, Reverend, please come forward.
Thanks, Sharon.
Yep, not a problem.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I apologize if I didn't fill out the form correctly.
You wouldn't be the first one.
My name is Reverend Allison Palm. I am a Unitarian Universalist minister serving the Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashua, as well as a resident of Nashua. And what I am passing around here is a letter from a broad network of more than 30 interfaith clergy from around the state who have signed on in support of the Access to Abortion Care Act. I am not going to read the letter because you have it, but I just want to share a few words. You have heard many times over the past couple hours that we're in a crisis moment when it comes to abortion care in this country. And since Roe v. Wade was overturned in June, so many people have lost access to abortion care, and we want to make sure that New Hampshire is not next. As people of faith, our faith and sacred texts compel us to support bodily autonomy, freedom of conscience, safe access to necessary health care without shame or fear of reprisal. Personally, I am here because my tradition, Unitarian Universalism, has long been in support of access to safe and legal abortion because we believe deeply in the right of conscience and the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We do not believe that it is the purpose or place of our state government to ban safe medical procedures. The only people who have a right to decide what is best for the pregnant person are the pregnant person themselves with their doctor. My faith tells me that every body is sacred, including and especially those bodies who can carry pregnancies, and every person has a right to holy agency over their body. From a faith perspective, I want to add that affirmation is much more than feel-good legislation. It is a statement about a person's inherent worth. I know that the people I serve are scared since the overturning, the loss of the protection of Roe. They are scared for their bodies, for their lives, for their right to choose their future. The loss of Roe has been experienced as a statement that the lives of those who can become pregnant are not worthy. And an affirmation would be a statement that they are. As faith leaders who care deeply about the well-being of the people of New Hampshire, I, along with my colleagues who have signed this letter, would urge you to pass Senate Bill 181, the Access to Abortion Care Act, and protect these sacred rights here in our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Okay. Seeing that there is no one else that had signed up to speak, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing on Senate Bill 181. Good.